Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax. The Midnight Request, the job that changed everything. I started working for Uber Eats about 6 months ago when I lost my retail job. At first, I thought it would just be temporary, something to pay the bills while I looked for something better. But honestly, I actually started to enjoy it. The freedom of being on the road, choosing my own hours, and not having a boss breathing down my neck was pretty nice. Most nights were pretty routine. I'd start around dinner time and work until about 10 or 11, making decent money from the dinner rush. The app would ping, I'd drive to a restaurant, pick up the food, and deliver it to someone's house or apartment. Simple stuff. But there was this one night in November that changed how I felt about the whole job. It was a Thursday, and I remember it being unusually quiet for the evening shift. I'd only done 3 deliveries by 9 o'clock, which was way less than normal. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a shopping center, just waiting for the next order to come through. The strange order. Around 10:30, my phone finally buzzed with a new order. I looked at the screen and saw it was from a 24-hour diner called Mel's. The order was pretty big, 3 entrees, 2 sides, and a couple of desserts. The payout looked good too, about $15 for what seemed like a pretty short drive. But when I looked at the delivery address, something felt off right away. It was for a street I'd never heard of, and I'd been driving in this area for months. When I put it into my GPS, it showed it was about 20 minutes away, way out on the edge of town where there weren't many houses. The customer's name was listed as M. Williams, and there were some specific instructions in the notes section. It said to please deliver to the back door and knock 3 times, then wait. I thought it was a little weird, but people have all kinds of specific requests for deliveries, so I didn't think too much about it. I drove to Mel's Diner and went inside to pick up the order. The woman behind the counter looked tired, like she'd been working all night. She handed me 3 large bags of food and said, "This is a big one. That customer must be really hungry." I loaded everything into my car and started driving toward the address. The further I got from the main part of town, the darker it got. There weren't many street lights out there, and the houses were spread pretty far apart. Some stretches of road didn't have any houses at all, just empty fields and trees. The isolated house. When I finally found the street, it was this narrow little road that branched off from the main highway. There were only a few houses scattered along it, and most of them looked pretty old. The house I was looking for was at the very end of the street, sitting by itself with no neighbors nearby. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I could see it was a small, single-story house with white siding that looked like it needed some work. There were no lights on in the front windows, but I could see a dim glow coming from somewhere in the back. The yard was pretty overgrown, and there was an old pickup truck parked to the side. I grabbed the 3 bags of food and walked around to the back of the house like the instructions said. The backyard was even more overgrown than the front, with tall grass and weeds everywhere. There was a small back porch with a single light bulb hanging over the door, but it wasn't very bright. Following the customer's instructions, I knocked 3 times on the back door and then stood there waiting. The house was completely quiet, no TV sounds, no voices, nothing. After about 30 seconds, I heard footsteps inside, slow and heavy, like someone was trying to be quiet. The first meeting. The door opened, but only about 6 inches. I could see part of a man's face looking out at me through the gap. He looked to be middle-aged, with dark hair and a beard. But what really caught my attention were his eyes. They looked really tired, almost scared. "You got my food?" he asked in a quiet voice. "Yeah, I've got your order from Mel's Diner," I said, holding up the bags. 3 entrees, 2 sides, and desserts. He opened the door a little wider and reached out for the bags. As he took them from me, I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "Thank you," he said. "How much do I owe you?" I told him the total, and he handed me cash, exact change plus a pretty good tip. But as he was giving me the money, he leaned closer and said something that made my blood run cold. "You need to leave right now," he whispered. "Don't come back here again. Ever." Before I could ask what he meant, he quickly closed the door and I heard the lock click. I stood there for a moment, confused and a little freaked out. What did he mean I shouldn't come back? Why did he seem so scared? The return trip. I walked back to my car, feeling uneasy about the whole interaction. As I was getting into my car, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was another vehicle parked on the street about 100 yards away. It was a dark SUV and it looked like someone was sitting inside it. I started my car and began driving back toward town, but I kept checking my rearview mirror. The SUV pulled out and started following me. At first, I thought it might just be a coincidence. Maybe they lived nearby and were just heading in the same direction. But as I continued driving, the SUV stayed behind me, matching my speed exactly. When I slowed down, it slowed down. When I sped up a little, it sped up too. This went on for about 10 minutes and I was getting more and more nervous. I decided to test whether they were really following me. I took a random turn onto a side street that I knew led to a dead end. Sure enough, the SUV turned too. My heart started racing as I realized this wasn't a coincidence. I quickly turned around in someone's driveway and headed back toward the main road. The SUV did the same thing, staying right behind me. I pulled out my phone and thought about calling the police, but I wasn't sure what I would tell them. Someone was following me, but they hadn't actually done anything wrong yet. A narrow escape. I decided to drive to the nearest gas station, which was well lit and hopefully had other people around. As I pulled into the parking lot, the SUV drove past without stopping. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but it looked like there was only one person in the vehicle. I sat in my car at the gas station for about 20 minutes, trying to calm down and figure out what had just happened. The whole thing felt surreal. Why would someone follow me after a simple food delivery? And why had the customer seemed so scared and told me never to come back? Eventually, I decided it was safe to head home. I took a different route than usual, checking my mirrors constantly, but I didn't see the SUV again. When I finally got home, I was exhausted and shaken up by the whole experience. I tried to put it out of my mind and told myself I was probably overreacting. Maybe the SUV following me really was just a coincidence. Maybe the customer was just having a bad day or dealing with some personal problems. The next week. For the next few days, I went back to my normal delivery routine and everything seemed fine. I didn't get any more orders for that area, and I gradually started to feel better about the whole thing. I convinced myself that it was just a weird one-time experience. But the following Thursday, exactly 1 week later, I got another order from Mel's Diner. When I saw the pickup address, my heart sank. It was the same house, the isolated place at the end of that dark street. This time, the order was even bigger than before. 5 entrees, multiple sides, and several drinks. The payout was good, but I really didn't want to go back there. I sat in my car for a few minutes trying to decide what to do. I could decline the order, but that would hurt my acceptance rate on the app. If your acceptance rate gets too low, they can deactivate your account. I needed this job, and I couldn't afford to lose it over what might have been nothing. Against my better judgment, I accepted the order and drove to Mel's to pick it up. The same tired woman was working behind the counter. When she saw me, she said, "Oh, you're going back to that house again? That guy must really like our food. Has he been ordering a lot?" I asked. "Yeah, every few days for the past couple of months. Always big orders, always delivered to the back door. Kind of strange, but his money's good." The second visit. I loaded the food into my car and started the drive out to the house. This time, I was much more aware of my surroundings. I kept checking for the dark SUV, but I didn't see it anywhere. When I got to the house, everything looked the same as before. No lights in the front, dim glow in the back, overgrown yard. I grabbed the bags of food and walked around to the back door. I knocked 3 times and waited just like before. After a moment, I heard the same slow, heavy footsteps inside. The door opened just a crack, and I could see the same man's face looking out at me. But this time, he looked even more scared than before. His eyes were darting around, looking past me into the dark backyard. "You came back," he said, and he sounded almost disappointed. "I'm just delivering your food," I said, holding up the bags. He opened the door a little wider and took the food from me. As he was handing me the money, he leaned close again. "I told you not to come back," he whispered urgently. "They're watching this place. They're watching me. And now they're watching you too." "Who's watching?" I asked, but he was already closing the door. "Just leave," he said through the door. "And don't come back. Please." Being watched. As I walked back to my car, I felt like someone was watching me. I looked around the dark backyard, but I couldn't see anyone. Still, the feeling was so strong that I almost ran the last few steps to my car. I got in and started the engine, eager to get out of there. As I was backing out of the driveway, I saw movement in the trees at the edge of the property. It was just a quick flash, like someone had ducked behind a tree when they saw my headlights. I drove away quickly, checking my mirrors constantly. About halfway back to town, I saw headlights appear behind me. It was too dark to tell what kind of vehicle it was, but they stayed far enough back that I couldn't make out any details. This time, I didn't want to take any chances. I drove straight to the police station and pulled into their parking lot. The vehicle that had been following me drove past without stopping, but it was moving too fast for me to get a good look at it. I sat in the police station parking lot for about an hour, trying to decide whether I should go inside and report what was happening. But what would I tell them? That a customer seemed scared and someone might be following me? I didn't have any proof of anything, and it all sounded pretty vague. The pattern continues. Over the next few weeks, I got orders for that house 3 more times. Each time I was tempted to decline, but I needed the money. And each time the customer seemed more and more frightened. During the 4th visit, he barely opened the door at all. He just stuck his hand out through a tiny gap to take the food and give me the money. He didn't say anything, but I could hear what sounded like crying coming from inside the house. During the 5th visit, he didn't come to the door at all. I knocked 3 times and waited, but nothing happened. After about 5 minutes, I heard his voice from inside, muffled like he was speaking through the door. "Just leave the food on the porch," he said. "Take the money from under the mat." I found an envelope under the doormat with the exact payment plus tip. I left the food on the porch and got out of there as quickly as possible. The discovery. A few days later, I was scrolling through local news on my phone when I saw a headline that made my stomach drop. "Local man missing after suspected home invasion." The article was about a man named Michael Williams who lived alone on Oakwood Street, the same street where I'd been making deliveries. According to the police, neighbors had noticed that his truck hadn't moved in several days, and when they went to check on him, they found his front door standing open. There were signs of a struggle inside the house, but no sign of Michael. The police were treating it as a suspected kidnapping and were asking anyone with information to come forward. I stared at the article for a long time, my hands shaking. Michael Williams. Williams. It was the same customer I'd been delivering food to. The realization. Suddenly, everything made horrible sense. The scared look in his eyes. The way he kept telling me not to come back. The feeling of being watched. Someone had been stalking him and he knew it. The food orders weren't because he was hungry, they were because he was trapped. He was probably too scared to leave his house to get food himself. And every time I delivered to him, whoever was watching probably saw me too. I thought about all those times I'd felt like I was being followed after making deliveries there. All those times I'd seen movement in the trees or noticed vehicles behind me. Someone had been watching the house, watching him and watching me. Going to the police. I drove straight to the police station and asked to speak to someone about the Michael Williams case. A detective took me into a small room and listened as I told him about all the deliveries I'd made to that address. He kept telling me not to come back, I explained. He seemed really scared, like someone was threatening him. And I think someone was following me after some of the deliveries. The detective took detailed notes about everything I could remember, the dates of the deliveries, the dark SUV, the movement I'd seen in the trees, everything. "You might have been the last person to see him," the detective said. "Can you think of anything else? Any detail, no matter how small?" I tried to remember everything about those visits. Then something occurred to me. "The orders," I said. "They were always really big orders. Way too much food for one person. And the woman at the diner said he'd been ordering like that for months." The detective looked interested. "What do you think that means?" "Maybe he wasn't alone in the house," I said. "Maybe someone was already there with him, forcing him to order food. That would explain why he seemed so scared and why he didn't want me to come back." The investigation. The detective said they would look into the food delivery angle as part of their investigation. He also said they would check with the diner to see if they had any other information about the orders. A few days later, the detective called me back. He said they had found something important at Michael's house, delivery receipts and cash that matched the amounts I told them about. They had also talked to the diner, and the staff confirmed that Michael had been placing large orders regularly for months. "We think you're right about him not being alone," the detective said. "We believe someone was holding him in his own house and forcing him to act normal, including ordering food deliveries. When neighbors started getting suspicious about him not leaving the house, whoever was holding him probably decided it was time to move him." The arrest. About a week later, I saw another news article about the case. Police had arrested 2 men in connection with Michael's disappearance. They had been caught trying to use his credit cards at a store about 2 hours away. According to the article, the men had been holding Michael hostage in his own home for months, slowly stealing his money and identity. They had forced him to act normal whenever anyone came to the house, including delivery drivers. The police found Michael alive but injured at a cabin where the men had moved him. He had been beaten and was dehydrated, but he was going to recover. The aftermath. Reading that article, I felt sick thinking about all those times I'd delivered food to him. He had been trying to warn me, trying to keep me safe, even while he was being held captive. And I had kept coming back because I needed the money. I called the detective to ask if there was anything else I could do to help with the case. He said my information had been crucial in understanding what had happened and that Michael was grateful I had come forward. He specifically asked me to thank you, the detective said. He said he was terrified that something would happen to you because you kept coming to the house. He was trying to protect you by telling you not to come back. A new perspective. After everything was resolved, I kept working for Uber Eats, but I approached the job very differently. I paid much more attention to customers who seemed scared or nervous. I listened when something felt off about a delivery. I also learned that sometimes when customers seem rude or strange, there might be something serious going on behind the scenes. Michael had seemed scared and secretive, but he was actually in terrible danger. The whole experience taught me that delivery drivers see a lot more than we realize. We go to people's homes at all hours, and sometimes we might be the only outside contact someone has. That's a big responsibility, and I don't take it lightly anymore. The final lesson. I still think about Michael sometimes, especially when I get orders for isolated houses or customers who seem nervous. The experience changed how I see my job. It's not just about delivering food anymore. Sometimes, we might be the only person who notices when something is wrong. I'm glad I finally went to the police when I did. I just wish I had trusted my instincts sooner. If I had reported the strange behavior earlier, maybe Michael wouldn't have had to suffer for as long as he did. But in the end, everything worked out and the bad guys were caught. Michael is safe now, and I learned a valuable lesson about paying attention to warning signs. It's a lesson I'll never forget. The graveyard shift. Starting the night shift. I'd been delivering pizza for Tony's Pizza Palace for about 8 months when they asked if I wanted to switch to the night shift. The pay was better, they added an extra $2 per hour for working after 10 p.m., and I needed the money to help pay for college. The night shift was definitely different from the day shift. During the day, most orders went to offices, schools, or families. But at night, you got a much weirder mix of customers. College students who had been studying late, people getting off work from bars and clubs, and sometimes just really lonely people who wanted someone to talk to. Most of the other drivers didn't like working nights because it could be dangerous driving around after midnight. But I actually preferred it. The roads were quieter, parking was easier, and the customers usually tipped better because they felt bad about ordering so late. For the first few weeks, everything went smoothly. I'd work from 10 p.m. until 4 a.m., making good money and getting home just as the sun was coming up. I got into a routine and started to really enjoy the job. The regular customer. About a month into working nights, I started getting regular orders from the same address. It was an apartment complex called Riverside Gardens on the east side of town. The orders always came from apartment 2B, and they were always placed by someone named Jennifer. The first few times I delivered there, everything seemed normal. Jennifer would meet me at the apartment door, pay for the pizza, and give me a decent tip. She looked to be in her 30s with brown hair and a friendly smile. She was always polite and seemed happy to see me. But after a few weeks, I started noticing some things that seemed a little odd. For one thing, Jennifer always had the same order, 1 large pepperoni pizza and a 2-liter bottle of Coke. Every single time. Who orders the exact same thing every night? Also, she always ordered at exactly 1:15 a.m. Not 1:10 or 1:20, but always 1:15 on the dot. I started watching for her order because I knew it would come in at that exact time every night I worked. Strange behavior. Another thing I noticed was that Jennifer never invited me inside her apartment, even when it was raining or really cold outside. She would always step out into the hallway to meet me, closing the door behind her. I could never see inside her apartment, which seemed kind of weird. She also seemed nervous whenever I was there. She would take the pizza quickly, give me the money, and then go back inside right away. She didn't make small talk like most customers did, and she always seemed like she was in a hurry. But the strangest thing was that I never saw any lights on in her apartment. The windows faced the parking lot, and every time I walked up to the building, apartment 2B was completely dark. But then Jennifer would answer the door right away when I knocked, like she had been waiting right there. The missed night. One night in December, I worked my usual shift, but Jennifer didn't place her regular order. At first, I didn't think much about it, maybe she was sick or out of town. But 1:15 came and went with no order from apartment 2B. The next night, the same thing happened. No order at 1:15. By the third night, I was actually starting to worry about her. I had gotten so used to her regular order that it felt wrong when it didn't come in. On the fourth night, the order finally came through again at exactly 1:15. I was actually relieved to see it pop up on the screen. I made the pizza and drove over to Riverside Gardens like usual. But when I got to apartment 2B and knocked on the door, no one answered. I knocked again, harder this time, and called out, "Pizza delivery." Still nothing. The investigation. I stood there for a few minutes, not sure what to do. I had Jennifer's pizza, but she wasn't answering the door. I tried calling the phone number from the order, but it went straight to voicemail. I decided to check with the apartment complex office to see if they knew anything about the tenant in 2B. But when I walked over there, I saw that the office was closed and wouldn't open until morning. I went back to apartment 2B and knocked one more time. This time, I heard something from inside. It sounded like furniture being moved around, but no one came to the door. I was starting to get a really bad feeling about the whole situation. Something was definitely wrong. I had been delivering to Jennifer for weeks, and she had never missed answering the door before. The discovery. I decided to walk around the building to see if I could look in the windows of apartment 2B. When I got to the side of the building, I could see that the apartment was completely empty. There was no furniture, no lights, nothing. It looked like no one had lived there for months. My heart started racing as I realized what this meant. If apartment 2B was empty, then who had been ordering pizza from there every night? And who had been meeting me at the door? I walked back to the front of the building and looked at the apartment directory. According to the directory, apartment 2B was vacant and had been for 6 months. The return to the store. I drove back to Tony's Pizza Palace in a state of total confusion. I found my manager, Steve, and told him what had happened. "That's weird," Steve said. "Are you sure you had the right apartment?" "I'm positive," I said. "I've been delivering there every night for weeks. Same apartment, same person, same order." Steve pulled up the order records on the computer. Sure enough, there were dozens of orders from apartment 2B at Riverside Gardens, all placed by someone named Jennifer, all for the same thing: one large pepperoni pizza and a 2-liter Coke. "That's really strange," Steve said. "All these orders were paid for with cash, so there's no credit card record. And look at this, they all came from the same phone number." He showed me the phone number on the screen. I recognized it as the same number I had tried to call earlier. The police report. Steve suggested that we call the police to report what had happened. It seemed like someone had been placing fake orders and somehow getting into an empty apartment to meet me there. When the police arrived, they took a detailed report about all the deliveries I had made to apartment 2B. They also went with me back to Riverside Gardens to check out the apartment. The apartment manager met us there with a key to 2B. When we opened the door, the apartment was definitely empty and looked like it had been that way for a long time. There was dust everywhere and no sign that anyone had been living there recently. "This apartment has been vacant since June," the manager said. "We haven't had a tenant there in months. The previous tenant moved out and we've been having trouble renting it because of some plumbing issues." The security footage. The apartment manager said they had security cameras in the parking lot and hallways that might have recorded something. We went to the office and looked at the footage from the nights I had made deliveries. What we saw on the video was shocking. The footage clearly showed me walking up to apartment 2B and knocking on the door. But then it showed the door opening and me handing a pizza to nothing. There was no one there. On the video, it looked like I was talking to thin air and handing a pizza to an invisible person. But I clearly remembered talking to Jennifer and taking money from her every time. "This is impossible," I said, staring at the screen. "I talked to her. She gave me money. I remember everything about her." The medical explanation. The police suggested that I might want to see a doctor about what had happened. They said that sometimes stress or lack of sleep could cause hallucinations that seemed very real. I made an appointment with my doctor the next day and told him everything that had happened. He ran some tests and asked me a lot of questions about my sleep schedule, diet, and stress levels. "Working the night shift can really mess with your body," he explained. When you're sleep deprived and working unusual hours, your brain can sometimes create very realistic hallucinations. It's more common than you might think. He said that the hallucinations were probably triggered by the routine of working the same shift every night and going to the same places over and over. My brain had created a pattern and filled in the missing pieces with a hallucination. The explanation. The doctor's explanation made sense, but it was still hard for me to accept. The conversations with Jennifer had seemed so real. I could remember exactly what she looked like, the sound of her voice, even the way she smelled like vanilla perfume. But when I thought about it more, I realized there had been signs that something wasn't right. The fact that her apartment was always dark, that she never invited me inside, that she seemed nervous and always rushed, these were all things my subconscious mind might have been trying to tell me that something was wrong. The doctor prescribed some medication to help me sleep better and suggested that I take a break from working night shifts for a while. He said that getting back on a normal sleep schedule would probably prevent the hallucinations from happening again. Back to day shifts. I talked to Steve about switching back to day shifts, and he was understanding about the whole situation. He said that several drivers had reported strange experiences while working nights, and that the night shift just wasn't for everyone. Going back to day shifts was definitely an adjustment. The customers were different, the pace was faster, and I made less money. But I felt much more alert and focused during the day, and I didn't have any more strange experiences. I also started getting better sleep at night, which helped a lot. Within a few weeks, I was feeling much more like myself again. The lesson learned. The whole experience taught me a lot about how important sleep is, especially when you're working a job that requires you to be alert and focused. I had been running on very little sleep for months, and it had started to affect my perception of reality. I also learned that night shift work isn't for everyone. Some people can handle the unusual hours and the isolation, but others, like me, are better suited for daytime work. Looking back, I'm grateful that nothing dangerous happened during those weeks when I was having hallucinations. I was driving around late at night and going to unfamiliar places while my brain wasn't working properly. That could have ended much worse than it did. The follow-up. A few months later, I ran into Steve at a coffee shop and we talked about what had happened. He told me that after my experience, the pizza place had started requiring all night shift drivers to take regular breaks and had put limits on how many consecutive nights someone could work. We had no idea that sleep deprivation could cause something like that, he said. Your experience helped us realize that we needed to take better care of our night shift employees. He also told me that they had looked into the phone number that Jennifer had been calling from. It turned out to be a disconnected number that hadn't been in service for over a year. Somehow, my brain had been creating not just the visual hallucination but also the phone calls. The recovery. It took several months for me to fully get over the experience. Even after I understood what had happened, I still had moments where I wondered if Jennifer had been real. The hallucinations had been so vivid and consistent that part of me found it hard to believe they weren't real. But eventually, I was able to accept what had happened and move on. I continued working at Tony's Pizza Palace for another year before graduating college and getting a job in my field of study. I still think about Jennifer sometimes, especially when I'm really tired or stressed. But I've learned to recognize the warning signs of sleep deprivation and to take better care of myself. The warning to others. I've told this story to several friends who work night shifts in various jobs, and it's made some of them more aware of how lack of sleep can affect their minds. A few of them have made changes to their sleep schedules or asked their employers for more reasonable hours. I think it's important for people to know that this kind of thing can happen to anyone. I wasn't using drugs or alcohol, I didn't have any mental health issues, and I was generally a healthy person. But extreme sleep deprivation can cause anyone to experience hallucinations. If you work night shifts or unusual hours, pay attention to how you're feeling and don't ignore warning signs like confusion, memory problems, or seeing things that don't seem quite right. It's better to ask for help or take a break than to risk your safety or the safety of others. The final thoughts. In the end, I'm glad I went through this experience even though it was scary at the time. It taught me a lot about taking care of myself and recognizing when I need help. It also made me more understanding of people who have mental health issues or unusual experiences. I never did figure out why my brain created Jennifer specifically, or why the hallucination was so detailed and consistent. But I suppose it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I learned from the experience and made positive changes in my life because of it. And I definitely have a lot more respect for people who work night shifts regularly. It's harder than most people realize, and it takes a toll on your body and mind that you might not notice until it's too late. The wrong address. The new job. I started working for Grubhub about 3 months ago when I moved to a new city for school. I didn't know anyone in town, and I needed a job that would let me work flexible hours around my class schedule. Food delivery seemed perfect. I could work when I wanted and explore the city at the same time. The city I moved to was pretty small, maybe about 50,000 people, so I figured it wouldn't take long to learn my way around. Most of the restaurants were downtown, and the residential areas were spread out in a few different neighborhoods. For the first couple of months, everything went smoothly. The customers were mostly college students and young families, and the tips were decent. I was getting comfortable with the job and starting to feel like I knew the area pretty well. But there was this one neighborhood on the north side of town that I hadn't delivered to very much. It was an older area with bigger houses and tree-lined streets. The few times I had been there, I noticed that the houses were pretty spread out and some of the street signs were hard to read because they were old and faded. The confusing order. One evening in late October, I got an order that was going to that north side neighborhood. It was from a Chinese restaurant called Golden Dragon, and it was a pretty big order, several entrees, appetizers, and drinks. The payout was good, so I accepted it right away. The delivery address was 1247 Maple Street, and the customer's name was listed as Robert Chin. The special instructions said to, please ring doorbell twice and wait by the front door. I picked up the food from Golden Dragon and put the address into my GPS. The drive to Maple Street took about 15 minutes, and I spent most of it driving through quiet residential areas with nice, well-maintained houses. When I got to Maple Street, I started looking for house number 1247. The street was pretty long, and the houses were numbered in a way that seemed kind of random. I drove slowly, checking each house number until I found what I thought was the right one. The first delivery attempt. The house at 1247 Maple Street was a large two-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. It looked like most of the other houses in the neighborhood, well kept, with a nice front yard and a circular driveway. I parked in the driveway and grabbed the bags of Chinese food. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed that all the lights in the house were off, which seemed a little strange for dinner time. But maybe the family was eating in the back of the house or something. I rang the doorbell twice, just like the instructions said, and waited by the front door. After about 30 seconds, I heard footsteps inside, and then the door opened. A man who looked to be in his 60s answered the door. He was wearing pajamas and a bathrobe, and he looked like he had just woken up from a nap. He definitely didn't look Chinese, and his name tag from what looked like a work uniform hanging nearby said Bill. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking confused. "I have a delivery from Golden Dragon for Robert Chin," I said, holding up the bags of food. The mix-up. The man looked even more confused. "I didn't order any Chinese food," he said, "and I'm not Robert Chin. My name is Bill Morrison." I looked at my phone to double-check the address. "This is 1247 Maple Street, right?" "No," Bill said, "this is 1274 Maple Street. You've got the numbers mixed up." I felt embarrassed about the mistake. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I must have misread the house numbers in the dark." "No problem," Bill said with a smile. "Happens all the time on this street. The numbers are hard to see at night. 1247 is back that way, about 4 houses down on the other side." I thanked him and walked back to my car, feeling a little stupid about the mix-up. I drove slowly back down the street, looking more carefully at the house numbers this time, finding the right house. When I found 1247 Maple Street, I realized why I had made the mistake. The house numbers were painted on small signs that were partially hidden by bushes, and in the dark, it was easy to confuse a 4 and a 7. The correct house looked very different from the one I had mistakenly gone to first. It was smaller, older, and not as well maintained. The paint was peeling in some places, and the front yard needed some work. But the lights were on inside, which was a good sign. I parked on the street and walked up to the front door with the Chinese food. This time, I made sure to double-check the house number before ringing the doorbell. I rang the doorbell twice and waited. After a moment, I heard someone inside say, "Just a minute," in what sounded like an older man's voice. Meeting Robert Chin. The door opened, and I was greeted by an elderly Asian man who looked to be in his 70s. He was smiling and seemed happy to see me. "You must be the delivery driver," he said. "I'm Robert Chin. Thank you so much for bringing the food." "No problem, Mr. Chin," I said, handing him the bags. "Sorry I'm a little later than expected." I accidentally went to the wrong house first. He laughed. Oh, that happens all the time on this street. The house numbers are terrible. Did you go to Bill Morrison's house by any chance? Yes, actually, how did you know? Because that's where everyone ends up when they're looking for my house, Robert said. Bill and I have become friends over the years because of all the mix-ups. Sometimes I get his mail, sometimes he gets mine. We joke about it all the time. A pleasant conversation. Robert seemed like a really nice guy, and he wasn't in any hurry to end the conversation. He told me that he had lived in the house for over 30 years and that the neighborhood had changed a lot in that time. Used to be all young families around here, he said. Now it's mostly older folks like me. My wife passed away a few years ago, so I don't cook much anymore. That's why I order delivery so often. I felt bad that he was lonely, and I was happy to chat with him for a few minutes. He told me about his children who lived in other states and how he had retired from teaching high school math. I hope I see you again soon, he said as he paid me for the food. It's nice to have someone to talk to. I told him I hoped to see him again too, and I meant it. He seemed like a genuinely nice person, and I enjoyed our conversation. The pattern begins. Over the next few weeks, I got several more orders for Robert Chen on Maple Street. Each time, I made sure to go to the right house, and each time, Robert was friendly and talkative. I learned that he ordered Chinese food about twice a week, always from Golden Dragon, and always pretty much the same things: sweet and sour pork, fried rice, and wonton soup. He said it reminded him of a restaurant he used to go to with his wife. Sometimes our conversations would last 10 or 15 minutes. He would tell me stories about his teaching days or ask me about my studies. I started looking forward to delivering to his house because he was always so genuinely happy to see me. But after about a month of regular deliveries, I started noticing some things that seemed a little odd. For one thing, Robert never seemed to actually eat the food I brought him. I would deliver it in the evening, but when I came back a few days later, I would sometimes see the containers from the previous order sitting in his trash can, still full of food. Growing concerns. I also noticed that Robert looked like he was losing weight. Each time I saw him, he seemed a little thinner than before. When I mentioned it to him one evening, he just laughed it off. I'm getting old, he said. Old people don't eat as much as they used to. But I was starting to worry about him. If he wasn't eating the food he was ordering, why was he ordering it? And why did he look like he was getting thinner? Another thing I noticed was that Robert always paid with cash, and he always had the exact change ready before I even told him the total. It was like he had memorized the price of his usual order, which made sense since he ordered the same thing every time. But one evening when I told him the total, he looked confused. That seems like more than usual, he said. I showed him the receipt, and he stared at it for a long time, like he was having trouble reading it or understanding it. The missed orders. In early December, Robert's regular orders suddenly stopped coming. I had gotten used to delivering to him twice a week, so when a whole week went by without an order from 1247 Maple Street, I started to worry. Maybe he was sick, or maybe he had decided to start cooking for himself, or maybe he was visiting his children for the holidays. There were lots of reasonable explanations, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something might be wrong. After 2 weeks with no orders, I decided to drive by his house just to check on him. I didn't have any food to deliver, but I wanted to make sure he was okay. When I got to 1247 Maple Street, the house looked different. There were newspapers piled up on the front porch, and the lights were off. The mailbox was overflowing with mail, and there were several packages sitting on the porch that looked like they had been there for days. The welfare check. I knocked on the front door, but no one answered. I could hear a TV playing inside, but when I called out Robert's name, there was no response. I walked around to the back of the house and looked in the windows. I could see into the kitchen, and it looked like there were dishes piled up in the sink and food containers scattered on the counter. I was really worried now, so I decided to call the police and ask them to do a welfare check. I explained that I was a delivery driver who had been bringing food to Robert regularly, and that I was concerned because he hadn't ordered anything in 2 weeks and his house looked like no one had been taking care of it. The police said they would send someone to check on him, and they asked me to meet them at the house to provide more information about what I had observed. The discovery. When the police officer arrived, we knocked on the door together, but still got no answer. The officer called out that he was with the police and was doing a welfare check, but there was still no response from inside. The officer decided to check if any of the doors or windows were unlocked so we could get inside. We found that the back door was unlocked, so we went in to look for Robert. We found him in the living room, sitting in his favorite chair in front of the TV. At first, I thought he was just sleeping, but when the officer checked on him, he realized that Robert had passed away. It looked like he had been gone for several days. The officer called for backup and an ambulance, and then asked me to wait outside while they processed the scene. I sat in my car, feeling terrible that I hadn't checked on Robert sooner. The investigation. While we were waiting for the other officers to arrive, the officer asked me more questions about my interactions with Robert. I told him about all the deliveries I had made and how Robert had seemed to be losing weight and getting more confused. "You said he was ordering food but not eating it?" the officer asked. "Yeah, I would see the containers from previous orders in his trash still full of food, and he kept getting thinner." The officer nodded. "That's pretty common with elderly people who are developing dementia. They forget to eat or they order food but then forget they ordered it." He explained that Robert had probably been in the early stages of dementia and that ordering food might have been a routine that he continued even when he wasn't actually eating it. The conversations we had were probably important to him because he was lonely and isolated. The aftermath. The medical examiner determined that Robert had died of natural causes, probably a heart attack. He had been dead for about a week when we found him, which meant he had died not long after his regular food orders stopped coming. I felt guilty that I hadn't checked on him sooner, but the police officer reassured me that there was nothing I could have done to prevent what happened. He said that I had actually done the right thing by calling for a welfare check when I noticed something was wrong. "A lot of elderly people die alone because no one notices when they stop their regular routines," he said. "You cared enough to check on him, and that says a lot about you." The family contact. A few days later, Robert's daughter called me. The police had given her my number because I was one of the last people to have regular contact with her father. She thanked me for calling the police to check on him and for being kind to him during his last few months. She said that Robert had mentioned me in their phone conversations and that he had really enjoyed talking to me. He was getting more confused and forgetful, but he always remembered the nice delivery driver who would chat with him, she said. "You probably don't realize how much those conversations meant to him." She told me that the family had been trying to convince Robert to move to assisted living, but he had been stubborn about staying in his own house. They had been planning to visit him for Christmas and were going to have a serious talk with him about getting more help. The funeral. Robert's daughter invited me to attend the funeral, which was held at a small church near his neighborhood. I had never been to a funeral for someone I had only known through work, but I felt like I should go to pay my respects. There weren't very many people there, just his 2 children, a few grandchildren, and some neighbors. During the service, his daughter talked about what a devoted teacher and father he had been, and how much he had loved his wife. She also mentioned that in his final months, he had looked forward to visits from his delivery driver friend, who would take time to talk with him. When she said that, several people turned to look at me, and I felt both sad and honored to have been mentioned. The lesson learned. After Robert's funeral, I started paying more attention to my elderly customers, especially the ones who seemed lonely or isolated. I realized that for some people, the delivery driver might be the only person they interact with regularly. I started taking a little more time to chat with customers who seemed like they wanted to talk, and I began noticing signs that someone might need help, like not eating the food they ordered, seeming confused about payments, or looking like they weren't taking care of themselves. A few months later, I had another elderly customer who reminded me of Robert. She was ordering food regularly but seemed to be getting more confused each time I saw her. Instead of waiting until something was obviously wrong, I called Adult Protective Services to ask if they could check on her. It turned out she was in the early stages of dementia and needed help managing her daily activities. Her family was able to get her the support she needed, and she's doing much better now. The ongoing impact. Robert's story has stayed with me long after I stopped working for Grubhub. It taught me that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, like taking a few extra minutes to talk to someone, can mean more than you realize. It also taught me to pay attention when something seems off about a regular customer. As delivery drivers, we often see people in their homes and get a glimpse into their daily lives. That gives us a unique opportunity to notice when someone might need help. I've told Robert's story to other delivery drivers I've met, and several of them have said it made them think differently about their interactions with customers. One driver told me that he started checking on an elderly customer who had stopped ordering, and it turned out the man had fallen and couldn't get to the phone to call for help. The memory. I still drive by Robert's house sometimes when I'm in that neighborhood. A new family moved in a few months after he passed away, a young couple with small children. The house looks much different now, with toys in the yard and bright lights in the windows. I'm glad that the house is full of life again, but I still think about Robert whenever I see it. I think about our conversations and how much they seem to mean to him. I think about how lonely he must have been, and how ordering food was probably one of the few ways he had to connect with other people. Most of all, I think about how important it is to treat every customer like a real person with their own story and struggles. You never know what someone is going through, or how much a simple conversation might brighten their day. The final reflection. If there's one thing I learned from knowing Robert, it's that we all have opportunities every day to make a positive difference in someone's life. It doesn't have to be anything big or dramatic. Sometimes just taking a few minutes to listen to someone or show that you care about them can be incredibly meaningful. I'm grateful that I got to know Robert, even though our relationship was brief and our interactions were limited to food deliveries. He was a good person who had lived a full life, and he deserved to have someone notice when he was gone. I hope that if I ever find myself in a similar situation, elderly, alone, and struggling, there will be someone like me who cares enough to check on me. And I hope that I'll continue to be the kind of person who notices when others need help, even in small ways. The late night call. The unusual schedule. I've been working for DoorDash for about 2 years when I decided to start taking orders later at night. Most drivers stopped working around 11 p.m., but I found that there was still decent money to be made delivering to people who worked late shifts or just liked to order food late at night. The late night crowd was definitely different from the dinner rush customers. I delivered to hospital workers getting off their shifts, college students pulling all-nighters, and people who worked in bars and clubs. The tips were usually pretty good because people felt bad about ordering so late. I typically worked from 11 p.m. until about 3 a.m., which gave me time to sleep in during the morning and attend my afternoon college classes. It wasn't a normal schedule, but it worked for my lifestyle and I was making decent money. Most late-night orders were pretty straightforward fast food from 24-hour places like McDonald's or Taco Bell, or sometimes Chinese food from restaurants that stayed open late. The customers were usually grateful and tired, and most interactions were quick and friendly. The first strange order. It was a Tuesday night in January when I got the first order that would change everything. It came in around 1:30 a.m., which was pretty typical for my shift. The order was from a 24-hour diner called Mel's, and it was going to an address I'd never been to before. The customer's name was listed as Sarah M. And the order was simple, just a cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake. But what caught my attention were the delivery instructions. Please call when you arrive. Do not knock or ring doorbell. Very important. I thought it was a little strange, but some people have sleeping roommates or family members, so I didn't think too much about it. I picked up the food from Mel's and drove to the address, which was in a quiet residential neighborhood about 15 minutes away. The first delivery. The house was a small, single-story home with a well-maintained front yard. Most of the windows were dark, but I could see a light on in what looked like the kitchen. I parked in the driveway and called the number from the order. The phone rang several times before a woman answered. Her voice was very quiet, almost a whisper. "Hello," she said. "Hi, this is your DoorDash driver. I'm outside with your order from Mel's." "Oh, thank you," she said, still speaking very quietly. "Can you please leave it on the front porch? I'll get it in just a minute." "Sure, no problem," I said. "The total is $18.50. "I left the money under the doormat," she said. "Thank you so much." I found an envelope under the doormat with the exact amount plus a generous tip. I left the food on the porch and drove away, thinking it was a little odd but not really concerning. The pattern develops. Over the next few weeks, I got several more orders from Sarah M. at the same address. Every order came in between 1:30 and 2 a.m., and the instructions were always the same. Call when you arrive, don't knock, leave the food on the porch, and take the money from under the doormat. The orders were always different types of food from different restaurants, but they were always single meals, never enough for more than one person. And Sarah always spoke in that same quiet whisper when I called to let her know I had arrived. I started to recognize her orders and even looked forward to them because she always tipped well and the deliveries were easy. I never had to wait for her to come to the door or deal with any complications. But I also started to wonder why she always whispered and never wanted me to knock. Was she trying not to wake someone up? Did she have roommates who went to bed early? Or was there some other reason she needed to be so quiet? The concerning call. After about a month of regular deliveries to Sarah, something happened that made me start to worry. I had just delivered her usual late-night order and was walking back to my car when my phone rang. It was the same number that Sarah always used to place her orders. I answered, expecting her to say she had forgotten something or needed to ask me a question about the order. "Hello," I said. But instead of Sarah's voice, I heard what sounded like a man speaking in the background. His voice was much louder than Sarah's whispered conversations, and he sounded angry. "Where is it?" the man's voice said. "I know you ordered something. I can smell the food." Then I heard Sarah's voice, but she wasn't speaking to me. She was talking to the man and she sounded scared. "I was just hungry," she said. "I didn't think you'd wake up." "You know you're not supposed to order food without asking me first," the man said, and his voice was getting louder and angrier. Then the line went dead. The realization. I sat in my car for several minutes trying to process what I had just heard. The call had obviously been an accident. Sarah must have accidentally called me back when she was trying to hang up or use her phone for something else. But what I had heard was really disturbing. The man sounded controlling and angry about something as simple as Sarah ordering food. Why would someone not be allowed to order food without permission? And why did Sarah sound so scared? I started thinking about all the previous deliveries I had made to her house. The whispered conversations, the instructions not to knock, the way she never came to the door, the fact that she always ordered single meals late at night when most people would be asleep. What if Sarah was in some kind of controlling or abusive relationship? What if she was only able to order food when the man was asleep, and that's why she had to be so quiet and secretive about it? The internal debate. I drove home that night feeling really unsettled about what I had heard. Part of me wanted to call the police, but I wasn't sure what I would tell them. I had accidentally overheard part of an argument, but I didn't know the full context of the situation. Maybe the man was her husband and they were just having a disagreement about money. Maybe they had a rule about discussing purchases with each other first. Maybe Sarah had a medical condition that required her to be on a special diet, and the man was trying to help her stick to it. But another part of me couldn't stop thinking about how scared Sarah had sounded and how controlling the man seemed to be. Even if they were married, why would she need permission to order food? And why did she have to be so secretive about it? The decision to act. The next few nights, I didn't get any orders from Sarah. I found myself checking my phone regularly, hoping to see her name pop up so I would know she was okay. When 3 days passed without any orders from her, I started to really worry. On the fourth night, I decided to drive by her house just to see if everything looked normal. When I got there, I was shocked by what I saw. There was a police car parked in the driveway, and the front door of the house was standing open. I parked across the street and watched as police officers went in and out of the house. After about 20 minutes, I saw them bring a man out in handcuffs. He was middle-aged with dark hair, and he looked angry as they put him in the back of the police car. A few minutes later, I saw a woman come out of the house with one of the officers. Even from across the street, I could tell it was Sarah. She looked upset but relieved, and she was carrying a small suitcase. The follow-up. The next day, I called the police station to ask if they could tell me anything about what had happened at that address. I explained that I was a delivery driver who had been concerned about a customer, and that I had witnessed what seemed like a domestic dispute. The officer I spoke to couldn't give me specific details about the case, but he did tell me that a man had been arrested for domestic violence and that the victim was safe and had left the house. Did the victim mention anything about food deliveries? I asked. Actually, yes, the officer said. She told us that ordering food late at night was one of the only ways she could get something to eat without him knowing. She said the delivery drivers who didn't knock or make noise were helping her more than they realized. I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness that Sarah had been living in such a controlling situation, but relief that she was finally safe and that the man had been arrested. The bigger picture. After talking to the police officer, I started thinking about all the other late-night deliveries I had made over the years. How many other customers might be in similar situations? How many people might be using food delivery as a way to get basic necessities when they're not allowed to leave their homes or make purchases freely? I realized that Sarah's specific instructions, don't knock, don't ring the doorbell, call instead, weren't just about being considerate of sleeping family members. They were about staying hidden from someone who was controlling her every move. The fact that she always ordered single meals, always late at night, and always paid with cash left under the doormat also made sense now. She was trying to get food for herself without anyone in the house knowing about it. The training idea. I decided to reach out to DoorDash to see if they had any training or resources for drivers who might encounter customers in dangerous situations. I was surprised to learn that they didn't have anything like that at the time. I suggested that they consider providing information to drivers about recognizing signs of domestic abuse and what to do if they suspected a customer might be in danger. I told them about Sarah's situation and how the accidental phone call had revealed what was really going on. A few months later, DoorDash actually did start including some basic information about recognizing signs of abuse in their driver training materials. They also created a way for drivers to report concerns about customer safety. I don't know if my suggestion had anything to do with those changes, but I like to think that Sarah's story helped make things a little bit safer for other people in similar situations. The new awareness. After Sarah's situation, I started paying much more attention to my customers and their delivery instructions. I began to recognize patterns that might indicate someone was in a controlling relationship or unsafe living situation. Customers who always whispered on the phone, who had very specific instructions about being quiet, who always paid with cash left in hidden locations, or who seemed nervous during brief interactions, these were all potential red flags that I hadn't noticed before. I also started being more flexible about unusual delivery requests. If someone asked me to leave food in a specific location or not to knock, I didn't question it. I realized that there might be important safety reasons for these requests that I wasn't aware of. Helping others. Over the next year, I encountered several other customers who seemed like they might be in difficult situations. I never heard anything as obvious as that accidental phone call from Sarah, but I noticed patterns that made me concerned. There was an elderly woman who always ordered small amounts of food and always seemed surprised when I told her the total, like she wasn't sure if she had enough money. I started keeping track of when she ordered and checking on her if she went too long without placing an order. There was also a young man who always ordered food to be left at a specific tree in a park rather than at a house address. When I asked him about it one day, he told me he was homeless and the park was where he slept at night. I started bringing him extra food when I had leftover orders that customers didn't pick up. The long-term impact. Sarah's situation taught me that food delivery drivers have a unique opportunity to help people who might not have many other options for getting help. We go to people's homes at all hours, we interact with people who might not have many other social contacts, and we often see patterns in behavior that others might miss. It also taught me the importance of trusting my instincts when something seems wrong. If I hadn't been paying attention to that accidental phone call, I might never have realized that Sarah was in danger. And if I hadn't decided to drive by her house when she stopped ordering, I might not have known that she had gotten help. The continuing vigilance. Even though I don't work for DoorDash anymore, I still think about Sarah and other customers who might be in dangerous situations. I've shared her story with friends who work in delivery or other service jobs, and several of them have told me it made them more aware of potential warning signs. I think it's important for people in service industries to understand that they might be the only regular contact that some customers have with the outside world. That's a big responsibility, but it's also an opportunity to make a real difference in someone's life. The final lesson. If there's one thing I learned from Sarah's situation, it's that you never really know what's going on in someone's life based on brief interactions. What seems like a simple food delivery might actually be someone's lifeline to the outside world. I'm grateful that I was able to play a small part in helping Sarah get to safety, even if it was mostly by accident. And I hope that by sharing her story, I can help other people recognize when someone might need help and know what to do about it. The most important thing is to pay attention and trust your instincts. If something seems wrong, it probably is. And even if you're not sure what to do, it's better to err on the side of caution and report your concerns to someone who can help. The abandoned mall. The unusual pickup location. I'd been working for Uber Eats for about a year and a half when I got one of the strangest pickup orders I'd ever seen. It was a Saturday night around 10 p.m., and I was having a pretty good shift with steady orders and decent tips. The order came through like any other. It showed up on my phone with a restaurant name I didn't recognize, Chen's Kitchen. The weird thing was the pickup address. Instead of being at a normal restaurant location, it was listed as being at Westfield Shopping Center, which was an old mall on the outskirts of town. I knew that mall pretty well because I had worked at a store there during high school. But that was about 5 years ago, and I was pretty sure the mall had been mostly empty for the last couple of years. Most of the anchor stores had closed, and the last time I had driven by, it looked like there were only a few small businesses still operating there. The delivery address was for an apartment complex about 10 minutes away, and the payout looked decent, about $12 for what seemed like a short trip. The customer's name was listed as David L., and there were no special instructions. The drive to the mall. I decided to accept the order, figuring that maybe there was a small restaurant operating in one of the remaining spaces in the mall. It wouldn't be the first time I had picked up food from an unexpected location. The drive to the mall took about 15 minutes through mostly quiet residential areas. As I got closer, I could see the large mall building in the distance. It looked different than I remembered, darker and more rundown. When I pulled into the parking lot, I was struck by how empty and abandoned it looked. There were only a few cars scattered throughout the huge parking lot, and most of the exterior lights weren't working. Many of the storefronts I could see were covered with metal security gates or had "for lease" signs in the windows. I parked near what used to be the main entrance and checked my phone again to make sure I had the right location. The app definitely showed Chen's Kitchen at this address, so I figured it must be one of the few remaining businesses inside the mall. Entering the mall. The main entrance doors were still unlocked, so I was able to get inside. But as soon as I walked in, I could tell that this place was nothing like the busy shopping center I remembered from high school. Most of the stores were empty and dark, with metal gates pulled down over their entrances. The few lights that were still working cast long shadows down the empty corridors. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the large, mostly empty space. There were still a few businesses operating. I could see a small cell phone repair shop and what looked like a discount clothing store, but most of the mall was clearly abandoned. The fountains were dry, and there were dead plants in some of the planters. I walked around for several minutes looking for any sign of Chen's Kitchen, but I didn't see anything. There were a few empty spaces that might have been restaurants at one time, but they were all clearly closed and had been for a while. The search continues. I pulled out my phone and tried calling the restaurant number listed in the app, but it went straight to a recording saying the number was not in service. I also tried calling the customer, David L., to ask if he had any additional information about where the restaurant was located, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I was starting to think there had been some kind of mistake with the order. Maybe the restaurant had closed and the app hadn't been updated, or maybe someone had entered the wrong address. But just as I was about to cancel the order and leave, I heard voices coming from somewhere deeper in the mall. I followed the sound down a corridor that led away from the main shopping area. The discovery. The voices led me to a section of the mall I hadn't explored yet. Back there, I found a small food court area that I had forgotten existed. Most of the restaurant spaces were empty and dark, but there was one small space that had lights on and seemed to be operating. There was a handwritten sign that said Chen's Kitchen, taped to the front of the space. It didn't look like much, just a small area with a couple of tables and what looked like a basic kitchen setup in the back. There was an older Asian man behind the counter who looked up when he saw me approaching. He smiled and said, "You must be the delivery driver." "Yes," I said, still a little confused about the whole situation. "I'm here to pick up an order for David L." "Oh yes, that order is ready," the man said, disappearing into the back area for a moment. He came out with a plastic bag containing several containers of food. The conversation. As the man handed me the food, I couldn't help but ask about the unusual location. "How long have you been operating here?" I said. "About 6 months," he replied. "The rent is very cheap because the mall is mostly empty. Not many customers come in person, but we do a lot of delivery orders." That made sense. If the rent was low enough, it might be worth operating a small takeout business even in a mostly abandoned mall, especially if you could get delivery orders through apps like Uber Eats. "It must be pretty quiet working here," I said. The man nodded. "Very quiet, especially at night. Sometimes I'm the only person in the whole building." I felt a little sorry for him, working alone in such an empty, eerie place. But he seemed friendly and was clearly making the best of the situation. The delivery. I thanked the man and started walking back through the empty mall toward the exit. The food smelled really good, and I was glad I had found the restaurant, even though it had taken longer than expected. The walk back through the abandoned mall was even more unsettling than the walk-in had been. Knowing that there was only one other person in the entire huge building made it feel even more isolated and creepy. When I got back to my car, I was relieved to be out of there. I put the food in my thermal bag and started driving toward the delivery address, which was at an apartment complex called Pine Grove Apartments. The delivery address. Pine Grove Apartments was a fairly typical complex, 3-story buildings with parking lots and a few amenities like a pool and a clubhouse. It looked well-maintained and busy, which was a stark contrast to the empty mall I had just left. The order was for apartment 2C in Building B. I found the right building and climbed the stairs to the second floor. When I knocked on the door of apartment 2C, a young man in his 20s answered. "David?" I asked. "Yes, that's me," he said. "Thanks for bringing the food. How much do I owe you?" I told him the total, and he paid me with cash plus a decent tip. He seemed normal and friendly, just like any other customer. The question. As David was taking the food from me, he made a comment that caught my attention. "This took a little longer than usual," he said. "Did you have trouble finding the restaurant?" "Actually, yeah," I said. "It's in that old mall, and it took me a while to find it." "Have you ordered from there before?" David looked confused. "What mall?" he said. "Chen's Kitchen is downtown on 5th Street. I order from there all the time." I felt a chill run down my spine. "No," I said. "I just picked this up from a place called Chen's Kitchen at the old Westfield Shopping Center." David stared at me for a moment. "That's impossible," he said. "Chen's Kitchen has been closed for over a year. The owner retired and moved back to China. And that mall has been completely empty for at least 2 years." The impossible truth. My heart started racing as I tried to process what David was telling me. If Chen's Kitchen had been closed for over a year, then who was the man I had just gotten the food from? And if the mall had been empty for 2 years, how was he operating a restaurant there? "Are you sure?" I asked. "I just talked to the owner. He said he'd been operating there for 6 months. David pulled out his phone and showed me a local news article from about 18 months ago. The headline read, "Beloved Chinese restaurant Chen's Kitchen closes after 20 years." The article included a photo of an elderly Asian man, the same man I had just met at the mall. "That's Mr. Chen," David said, pointing to the photo. "He used to make the best lo mein in town. But he definitely closed his restaurant and moved away. I was really sad when it happened because I ate there all the time." The return trip. I told David I would look into what was going on and left his apartment feeling completely confused and more than a little scared. Something was seriously wrong with what had just happened, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I decided to drive back to the mall to see if I could get some answers. On the way there, I tried to think of logical explanations for what was happening. Maybe there was another Chinese restaurant with a similar name. Maybe Mr. Chen had decided to reopen his business in a different location. Maybe David was mistaken about the restaurant being closed. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The whole situation felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. When I got back to the mall, the parking lot looked exactly the same as it had before, mostly empty with just a few scattered cars. I parked in the same spot and walked back into the building. The empty mall. This time, walking through the mall felt even more unsettling than before. I retraced my steps toward the food court area where I had found Chen's Kitchen. But as I got closer, I noticed that everything looked different. The corridor that had led me to the restaurant before seemed darker and more rundown. When I finally reached the food court area, I was shocked by what I saw. All of the restaurant spaces were empty and dark, including the one where I had just picked up food an hour earlier. There was no sign for Chen's Kitchen, no lights, no kitchen equipment, nothing. The space looked like it had been abandoned for years. The search for evidence. I walked around the entire food court area, checking every space to make sure I hadn't gotten confused about which one it was. But they were all clearly empty and had been for a long time. There was dust everywhere, and some of the spaces had debris and old equipment scattered around. I even checked the other areas of the mall, thinking maybe I had gotten the location wrong. But there was no sign of any operating restaurant anywhere in the building. The few businesses that were still open, the cell phone repair shop and the clothing store, were in completely different areas and were clearly not Chinese restaurants. I pulled out my phone and checked the Uber Eats app to see if I could find any additional information about the order I had just completed. But when I looked at my delivery history, there was no record of picking up food from Chen's Kitchen or delivering to David L. The missing record. That was when I really started to panic. According to the app, I hadn't completed any deliveries in the past hour. My last recorded delivery was from earlier in the evening, before I had gotten the order for Chen's Kitchen. I tried calling Uber Eats customer support to ask about the missing order, but after being on hold for 20 minutes, I was told that there was no record of any order matching the description I gave them. Are you sure you completed this delivery through our app? The customer service representative asked. Because I'm not showing any orders for a Chen's Kitchen in our system. I was sure I had accepted the order through the app, but I couldn't prove it. There was no record of it anywhere, the physical evidence. But I knew the whole thing had been real because I still had the cash that David had paid me for the food. I counted it again. It was exactly the amount he had given me, including the tip. I also remembered specific details about the conversation I had with Mr. Chen at the mall, and about delivering the food to David's apartment. Those memories were too clear and detailed to have been imaginary. But if there was no record of the order in the app, and if Chen's Kitchen had been closed for over a year, then how had any of it happened? The research. When I got home that night, I spent hours researching everything I could find about Chen's Kitchen and the Westfield Shopping Center. What I found only made the situation more confusing and frightening. According to multiple sources, Chen's Kitchen had indeed closed permanently in March of the previous year when Mr. Chen retired. There were several news articles about the closure, and all of them confirmed that Mr. Chen had moved back to China to live with his family. I also found information about the mall. It had been struggling for years, and the last major tenant had moved out about 2 years ago. According to the most recent articles I could find, the mall was completely vacant and was scheduled to be demolished within the next year. The obituary. But the most disturbing thing I found was an obituary from 6 months ago. Henry Chin, age 67, had died of a heart attack while visiting family in China. The obituary mentioned that he had owned and operated Chen's Kitchen for 20 years before retiring. Mr. Chin, the man I had just talked to and gotten food from, had been dead for 6 months. The return visit. Despite how scared I was, I felt like I had to go back to the mall one more time to try to understand what had happened. I waited until the next evening and drove there again, hoping to find some explanation for what I had experienced. This time, I brought a flashlight and a camera, planning to document everything I found. When I got to the mall, the parking lot was completely empty. Even the few cars that had been there the night before were gone. The main entrance doors were locked. I walked around the entire building, checking every entrance, but they were all secured. There was no way to get inside. The security guard. As I was walking around the building, a security guard approached me in a patrol car. He rolled down his window and asked what I was doing there. "I'm a delivery driver," I explained. "I picked up food from a restaurant inside this mall last night, but now I can't get in." The security guard looked confused. "Son, this mall has been completely closed to the public for over a year. There are no businesses operating inside, and there's no way you could have picked up food from here last night." "But I was here," I insisted. "I talked to the owner of Chen's Kitchen. He gave me food to deliver." The security guard's expression changed to one of concern. "Chen's Kitchen? That restaurant closed a long time ago, and the owner died several months ago. Are you feeling all right?" The medical explanation. The security guard suggested that I might want to see a doctor about what I was experiencing. He said that sometimes stress, lack of sleep, or certain medical conditions could cause very realistic hallucinations. I made an appointment with my doctor the next day and told him everything that had happened. He ran several tests and asked me detailed questions about my sleep patterns, diet, and stress levels. "Working late night shifts can really affect your brain chemistry," he explained. "Combined with the stress of driving to unfamiliar places and dealing with difficult customers, it's possible that you experienced what's called a complex hallucination." He said that complex hallucinations could involve multiple senses and could seem completely real, including conversations with people and physical interactions with objects. The lingering questions. The medical explanation made sense, but there were still things about the experience that I couldn't understand. If it had all been a hallucination, where had the cash come from that David had paid me? I had counted it multiple times, and it was definitely real money. Also, how could I have hallucinated such specific details about David's apartment and his conversation about ordering from Chen's Kitchen regularly? If Chen's had been closed for over a year, how would my brain have created such a detailed backstory about him being a regular customer? I tried calling the phone number that had been listed for David L. in the order, but it was disconnected. I also tried driving by Pine Grove Apartments to see if I could find apartment 2C, but when I asked at the office, they told me there was no resident named David L. in the complex. The continuing mystery. Even months later, I still don't have a satisfactory explanation for what happened that night. The medical explanation makes the most sense logically, but there are too many specific details that don't fit with the hallucination theory. I've stopped working late night shifts for Uber Eats, partly because of my doctor's recommendation and partly because the experience scared me so much. I stick to daytime and early evening deliveries now, and I haven't had any similar experiences. I've also done more research into the history of the Westfield Shopping Center and found some interesting information. According to some local historians, there were several unexplained incidents at the mall in the years before it closed. Security guards reported seeing lights in empty stores and hearing voices in vacant areas. The paranormal theory. Some people I've told this story to have suggested that what I experienced might have been paranormal, that I somehow interacted with the ghost of Mr. Chen, who was still operating his restaurant in the afterlife. I'm not usually someone who believes in ghosts or supernatural explanations, but I have to admit that it would explain some of the things that don't fit with the hallucination theory. If Mr. Chen's spirit was still running his restaurant in the abandoned mall, that would explain why there was no record of the order in the app and why I couldn't find any evidence of the restaurant when I went back. It would also explain how I got real cash from the transaction, and why I was able to have such detailed conversations with both Mr. Chen and David about things I wouldn't have known about if it was all in my head. The impact on my work. The experience has definitely changed how I approach my delivery job. I'm much more careful about accepting orders from unfamiliar locations, and I always do some research if something seems unusual about a pickup or delivery address. I also pay more attention to my physical and mental health. I make sure to get enough sleep, eat regularly, and take breaks when I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed. I don't want to risk having another experience like that, whether it was medical or supernatural. I've also become more interested in the history of the places I deliver to. I've learned about several other businesses and locations in my city that have interesting or unusual histories, and I find myself being more aware of the stories behind the places I visit for work. The advice to others. If I had any advice for other delivery drivers, it would be to trust your instincts when something feels wrong or unusual. Whether what I experienced was a hallucination, a paranormal encounter, or something else entirely, the important thing is that I recognized that something wasn't normal and took steps to understand what was happening. I would also encourage drivers to take care of their physical and mental health, especially if they work unusual hours or in stressful conditions. The late night shift can be profitable, but it can also be hard on your body and mind in ways you might not realize until it's too late. Finally, I would say that it's okay to decline orders or avoid situations that make you feel uncomfortable, even if you can't explain why. Your safety and well-being are more important than any individual delivery or the money you might make from it. The final thoughts. I still think about that night regularly, and I probably always will. Whether it was a medical episode, a supernatural experience, or something else entirely, it was one of the most unsettling things that has ever happened to me. What bothers me the most is not knowing for sure what really happened. I would almost prefer to know that it was definitely a hallucination, or definitely a ghost, rather than being left with all these unanswered questions. But in some ways, the mystery makes it more interesting. It's reminded me that there are still things in the world that we don't understand, and that our everyday experiences might be more complex and mysterious than we usually think. Whether Mr. Chen was a figment of my imagination or a restless spirit still serving food to hungry customers, I'm grateful for the experience in a strange way. It's made me more aware of the world around me and more open to possibilities I never would have considered before. And who knows, maybe someday I'll get another order that leads me back to that abandoned mall, and I'll finally get the answers I'm looking for. The man who waited by the vending machine. A normal job, a quiet building. I used to work as a night janitor at a small medical office building on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a hospital or anything like that, just a few floors with doctors, dentists, and therapists during the day. At night, the building was completely empty. No patients, no staff, just me. The job was simple. I cleaned the floors, restocked paper towels, emptied trash bins, and wiped down surfaces. It was quiet, and that's what I liked about it. Most nights I listened to music or podcasts through one earbud while I worked. I liked the routine. I liked the calm. I usually started at 9 p.m. and finished around 3:30 in the morning. I had access to every floor, and my cleaning route was always the same. First floor, second floor, then the top. Then I'd come back down and check everything one more time before leaving. There was a small vending machine in the lobby. I'd stop there about halfway through my shift to grab a snack or drink. I started to think of that break as the one bright spot in my night. But everything about that changed during the week that he started showing up. the first time I saw him. It was a Monday night, and everything had been normal up to that point. I was just about finished with the second floor and ready for a short break. I walked down to the lobby, passing through the hallway with the glass windows. The vending machine stood in the corner near the elevators. As I rounded the corner, I stopped. There was a man standing there. He was just staring at the vending machine, not buying anything, not doing anything, just staring at it like he didn't know how it worked. He had on a gray hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face and dirty jeans. His hands were in his pockets and his back was a little hunched. Something about him didn't feel right, but I didn't want to assume the worst. I cleared my throat softly and said, "Hey, you okay?" He didn't answer, didn't even move. He just kept staring. I waited for a second, unsure of what to do. Finally, I backed away and returned upstairs. I figured he must have come in earlier during the day and hid somewhere in the building until it emptied out. That thought made me uncomfortable, but he wasn't doing anything, just standing there, watching the machine. I thought it was a fluke. The next night, I went back to work like normal. I didn't really expect to see him again. I even laughed to myself thinking maybe it had been a weird dream. But when I went down to the vending machine, there he was again. Same guy, same hoodie, same posture, just standing there. I didn't say anything this time. I watched him from around the corner for a few seconds and then turned back. I called the building manager and told him there might be someone hanging around after hours. He said he'd check the cameras in the morning. The following day, he called me and said the cameras didn't catch anything. That didn't make sense to me. The vending machine area was right under a camera. But I didn't push the issue. I just kept working and decided to avoid the vending machine for the rest of the week. Strange things started happening. It was Thursday night when things really changed. I was cleaning one of the dental offices on the third floor when I heard the faint sound of a soda can drop. That familiar clunk from the vending machine. It was far away, but the sound carried through the empty building. I stopped what I was doing and listened. Another can dropped. Then silence. My heart started beating faster. I opened the office door and stepped into the hallway. The lights were dim and everything was still. I walked slowly down to the second floor, then the first. The vending machine stood alone, glowing faintly in the dark lobby. There was no one there, but something was off. I walked closer and noticed that 3 soda cans were sitting in the machine's tray. No money had been inserted. The keypad was still flashing like someone had been pressing buttons. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't take any of the drinks. I backed away and went into the janitor's closet, locking myself in for a while. I told myself it was just a glitch. That's all it could be. Footsteps and whispers. Friday night was worse. By then, I had started feeling jumpy even before I got to work. I told myself not to look at the vending machine. Just do the job and leave. But things started happening that I couldn't ignore. While mopping the second floor hallway, I heard slow footsteps from the stairwell, heavy and uneven. I stopped moving and listened. The steps paused, then came closer. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Nothing. I walked toward the stairs and opened the door. The stairwell was empty. But just as I turned to leave, I heard something soft, almost like a whisper. "Hungry?" The sound was so faint I thought maybe I imagined it, but it didn't feel imagined. It felt real. I shut the door and walked away fast, gripping the mop handle tightly. He was getting closer. That night, I didn't go to the vending machine at all. I avoided the lobby completely. But even from the top floor, I could feel him there. The presence, the weight, like something cold sitting on my chest. I saw shadows moving through the reflection of the office windows. Once, I turned around and thought I saw the back of a hoodie disappearing down the hallway. I was so scared I started skipping rooms. I just wanted to be done. When I finally got to the exit and stepped outside, I almost cried in relief. But just as I pulled my keys out, I saw something across the street under the street light. A man, same hoodie, just standing, facing the building. He never moved. He just watched. The night I almost didn't leave. Saturday night, I nearly didn't go in. But I needed the money and I didn't want to seem crazy. I told myself I'd be fast. No breaks. No vending machine. Just finish and leave. Everything went fine for the first hour. But then the lights flickered. Not all at once, just in the hallway leading to the lobby. I kept cleaning, refusing to go down there. But the flickering kept going. Then I heard the machine again. Clunk, clunk, clunk. 3 more sodas. I froze. My legs didn't want to move. Then came the footsteps. Soft, shuffling, coming closer. I ran. I didn't finish the job that night. I ran to the back exit, got in my car, and drove home. I called the building manager and told him I couldn't work there anymore. The footage they found. A few days later, the building manager called me back. He said, "I think you were right." I checked the security system again, and there was something. He didn't say much more, only that they were upgrading the cameras and changing the locks. When I asked what he saw, he paused and said, "Somebody was there. Every night." That was all. I never went back to that job. I took something else. Day shift, public place, lots of people. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the sound of a soda can dropping when I try to fall asleep. Sometimes I look outside and wonder if he's still watching. Waiting. I worked in a remote gas station, but something was watching us. The gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was one of those jobs you take when you have no other choice. I had just dropped out of community college, broke, and needed to get away from my hometown. My cousin Eric told me about a gas station where he worked, out in the desert, miles from any real town. He said they needed a night shift worker, and the pay was better than minimum wage. So I packed my bag, got on a bus, and found myself standing in front of a small, flickering gas station in the middle of nothing. Just one long road, endless sand, and a metal sign that creaked in the wind. It wasn't scary at first, just lonely. Eric worked the morning shift, and I would come in around 10 p.m. and stay until sunrise. There were no other houses nearby, no traffic. Sometimes we wouldn't get a single customer all night, but I didn't mind the silence, at least not at first. The rules were odd, but I didn't ask questions. On my first night, the station manager, an older man named Dale, gave me the rundown. He showed me the register, the pump controls, and the cooler in the back. But before he left, he got serious. "No matter what you see on the cameras," he said, "don't go outside between 2 and 3 a.m. Just stay behind the counter, and whatever you hear, ignore it." I laughed a little, thinking he was joking. But he didn't smile. "Don't open the door. Don't talk to anyone. Don't even look out the window. That hour isn't ours." I remember nodding just to make him stop talking. I figured he was just trying to mess with the new guy. Or maybe he'd been working alone for too long. Still, I didn't forget his words. First few nights were boring. Then it started. For almost a week, it was just me, a flickering light, and the occasional bug buzzing against the glass. I brought books, listened to music, and stared at the same 2 lanes of desert road. Sometimes coyotes passed by, or I saw headlights in the distance. But no one ever stopped. Then, on the 7th night, I noticed something strange. It was 1:55 a.m., and the camera started to fuzz. Not completely. Just a little static, like bad reception on an old TV. The outside cameras flickered the most, especially the one pointing toward the road. At exactly 2 o'clock, all the exterior feeds cut out. Just black screens with light static. I felt a chill even though the heater was on. I remembered Dale's warning and stayed behind the counter. For the next hour, I didn't move. Nothing happened. At 3 a.m., the cameras came back online just like that. I thought it was a technical glitch. Until the next night. The stranger in the dust. On the second week, I was settling into the shift. It was around 2:15 a.m., and I was pretending not to care that the outside cameras were all down again. But this time, I heard something. A soft knock on the glass door. Just one knock. Then silence. I froze. The front of the store was mostly glass, so I could have looked up and seen who it was. But I remembered what Dale had said. "Don't look out. Don't talk. Don't open the door." I stayed perfectly still. Another knock. A little louder. Then, slowly, I heard footsteps walking away across the gravel. They didn't sound heavy. Just deliberate. When the cameras came back at 3 a.m., there was nothing out there. No sign anyone had been there. I told Eric about it in the morning, and he just shrugged. "You probably imagined it," he said. "Or maybe some lost traveler. People get weird at night out here." But he looked uncomfortable. Like he didn't believe his own words. The figure in the rear lot. 2 nights later, I decided to test something. I turned the lights off inside the station, leaving just the glow of the monitors. It made it harder to see inside from the outside. When 2 a.m. came and the cameras shut off, I sat in the dark. At 2:17, I heard something scrape across the back door. Not a knock. A long dragging sound. I checked the screen showing the rear feed, but it was still static. Then I saw it. Not through the camera, but with my own eyes, through the back office window. A figure standing at the edge of the lot, perfectly still, too tall, thin. I couldn't make out any features. Just a long shadow against the desert backdrop. No lights, no sound, just the wind and the figure. I crouched below the window and stayed there until 3 a.m. When I looked again, it was gone. The hollow voice on the pump intercom. We had an intercom system for when people were at the pump and needed help. It hadn't been used the entire time I worked there. One night, just before 2 o'clock, it crackled to life. Help. The voice was flat, robotic, but too broken, like someone trying to copy how humans speak. I froze. Help me? It kept repeating, slow, dragged out. I didn't press the button. I didn't respond. I turned the volume all the way down, but I could still hear it. Not through the speakers anymore. It was outside the door now. I didn't look. I didn't move. And then it stopped. I almost opened the door. One night I made a mistake. It was 2:23 a.m. I heard tapping on the side wall, like fingers gently knocking on metal. Then a voice. Eric? Hey man, it's me. You left your phone at home. It was Eric's voice. Exactly like him. But I knew Eric was sleeping. I had just talked to him earlier. Still, it sounded so real. I stood up. I stepped toward the door. My hand reached out to touch the handle. And then I remembered what Dale had said. Don't talk. Don't open the door. I stepped back, sat down, turned up the radio and closed my eyes. I could still hear it outside. Eric? Eric? It said it slower, like it was trying to figure out if that was the right name. Then silence. I didn't sleep after that shift. Dale came back and he was terrified. After 3 weeks, Dale returned for an inspection. I told him everything. The voices, the figure, the static cameras. He sat down heavily and looked tired, older than before. I thought maybe they'd moved on, he said quietly. Who? I asked. He just shook his head. They don't belong here. They never did. Just stay inside. Don't open the door. They're not curious anymore. They're hungry. That was the last time I saw Dale. He quit the next day, the night it got inside. It was raining that night, which was rare in the desert. At 2 a.m., the cameras flickered as usual. But the rain made everything feel worse, darker, colder, heavier. At 2:37, I heard the intercom crackle. Not a voice this time. Breathing. Heavy, wet breathing. Then the back door creaked. Not a knock. Not a voice. A slow, creaking sound. The lock was strong but old. I grabbed the emergency flashlight and locked myself in the small maintenance closet behind the cooler. I waited. The breathing got louder. Then silence. I couldn't tell how long I was in there. At 3 o'clock, the sound stopped. The air felt lighter. I opened the door. Everything looked normal. But the back door was wide open. I left without saying goodbye. I didn't finish my shift. I walked out, got into my cousin's car, and drove until the sun rose. I never went back. Eric still works there. He doesn't talk much anymore. Says nothing strange ever happens when he's there. But when I ask if he's ever stayed past 2 a.m., he just stares at me, like he's remembering something. The gas station still stands. I checked online a few months ago. The station's still open. People stop for gas, take pictures of the old sign, leave reviews like, quiet place, but something about it gave me the creeps. If you ever drive through that stretch of desert, and you find yourself near that old gas station, do yourself a favor. Don't stop between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. And whatever you hear, don't look out the window. The girl in the blue coat. I didn't think the bus stop was haunted. There's something really quiet about early mornings, especially when the sky is still dark and the world hasn't woken up yet. That's the time I usually leave for work. It's peaceful. No traffic. No loud noises. Just me, the cold air, and a few flickering streetlights. I like it that way. For almost 3 years, I took the same bus at the same time from the same stop outside my apartment building. It was never busy. Most days, I was the only one standing there, leaning against the rusty metal pole with the faded bus sign on it. I never had any problems. But then something changed, slowly at first. I wouldn't have noticed anything strange if it hadn't been for the girl in the blue coat. She was just there. The first time I saw her, it was raining lightly. The kind of rain that doesn't soak your clothes but makes the ground shine. I remember pulling my hood tighter as I approached the stop and seeing her already standing there. She was facing the road, hands in her coat pockets, hair tied back. She had a blue coat on, bright and clean with big buttons down the front. I didn't think much of it. People sometimes show up out of nowhere. Maybe she moved in recently. But when I said good morning, she didn't say anything. Didn't even look at me. Just stood there, staring straight ahead. She was always ahead of me. After that morning, I started seeing her more often. Every day she was already there when I arrived. Always facing the road. Always in that same blue coat. I tried talking to her again, asking if she was new to the area, if she was waiting for the same bus. Nothing. She never spoke. Never moved. And the strange part? She never got on the bus. She never boarded. The first few times I figured she might be waiting for a different line. But I never saw her get on any bus. The one I took would pull up, and I'd glance at her to see if she'd step forward. She never did. I even looked back once through the rear window after boarding. She was still standing there like a statue. The bus driver knew something. One morning, curiosity got the better of me. As I paid my fare, I leaned toward the driver, a friendly older guy I chatted with before. "Hey," I said quietly, "do you see that girl at the stop sometimes? Blue coat doesn't talk." He didn't answer right away. He just kept staring ahead, expression unreadable. Then he muttered, "Don't look at her." That was it. He didn't say anything else. I stopped looking. After that, I tried to ignore her. Even when I felt her standing just a few feet away from me in the dark. Even when I felt like she was watching me out of the corner of her eye. But something about her presence changed. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was heavy, cold. Like the air got thicker whenever she was there. The day she followed me. One morning I was running late. I missed my usual bus. I thought maybe that would be a good thing. Maybe I'd finally get a break from the strange routine. But when I stepped outside, she was still there. Only this time she turned. Slowly. Her head tilted slightly toward me. Her eyes were hollow, deep and dark, like empty tunnels. I froze. Then she took one step in my direction. Just one. I turned around and went back inside my building without waiting for the bus. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about her face. The way her mouth didn't move, but I could almost feel words pressing against my mind. I didn't know why, but I felt like I had seen her before. Not in real life, but in some old dream I couldn't quite remember. Something about her coat, the shape of her hands, the way she stood, it was all familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I asked the neighbors. Out of desperation, I asked a few people in my building if they had ever seen the girl in the blue coat. Most shrugged. One man told me he usually left for work much later. Another woman said she thought she saw a girl like that a few times but didn't think it was odd. But then I met Mrs. Carmichael. She lived on the third floor and had been in the building for over 40 years. When I asked her, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "She's back. The girl from 1978. Mrs. Carmichael told me there was a girl who used to live in the building, a high school student named Emily. She had bright red hair and always wore a blue coat in the winter. One morning in 1978, Emily disappeared. She had gone to wait for the bus before school, but she never arrived. No one ever found her. Just gone. Vanished. The only thing left behind was her backpack sitting upright at the bus stop bench. I couldn't unsee her. Even after hearing that story, I kept going to work, hoping maybe I was imagining everything. But the girl didn't go away. If anything, she got closer. Some mornings, she'd be standing closer to where I stood. Some days, she would be looking down at the ground like she was listening for something. One day, I found her standing in front of the entrance to my building before dawn. I didn't leave for work that day. The night I dreamed of her. That night I had a dream. I was standing at the bus stop in the rain. The streetlights buzzed and flickered. And there she was standing beside me. But in the dream she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, but it echoed like it came from inside my chest. She said, "You saw me." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. Then she reached out and touched my hand. I woke up holding something. When I woke up, I was sitting up in bed. My hand was clenched tightly into a fist. And inside it, a small, rusted bus token. The kind they stopped using in the 80s. I don't own one. I never have. I didn't know what to do with it, so I wrapped it in a tissue and put it in a drawer. But it still feels warm sometimes. She's not there anymore. I haven't seen her in weeks now. The bus stop is just a bus stop again. The mornings are still dark, but peaceful. Sometimes I wonder if she was really there, or if something in me brought her out. Maybe she just needed to be seen one last time. Maybe I was the only one who ever really noticed her. But I still leave a space beside me at the stop, just in case. The lights in apartment 3B. I never noticed that window before. I've lived in this building for 5 years now. It's old, with creaky floors, yellowing walls, and a musty smell that never quite goes away, no matter how much air freshener you use. But it's cheap and it's home. I live on the second floor in 2C. It's quiet most of the time, and most of my neighbors keep to themselves. But recently, I noticed something strange. Something I'm not even sure how I missed all these years. There's a window across from mine, high up 3rd floor. A narrow one, tucked just behind a drain pipe. For some reason, I never paid attention to it before. But now I see it every night. And there's always a light on in there. It was always dim and flickering. At first, I thought it was just someone watching TV late at night. The kind of blue glow that dances around a room. But then I realized there's no motion, no shadows moving, no sound, just that soft flickering light. The window's always half open too, even during heavy rain or wind. That bothered me. So I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Jennings. She's lived here since the 70s and knows everything about everyone. Oh, that's 3B, she said, then paused. But no one lives there. Apartment 3B was supposed to be empty. That didn't make any sense. If no one lived there, why was the light on every night? Why did I sometimes hear faint creaking footsteps above my ceiling, directly above my bed? Mrs. Jennings said 3B had been vacant for years. The landlord keeps it locked. There's damage to the floorboards, something about a burst pipe that never got fixed. It's unlivable apparently. But I started watching that window. Every night. Same light. Same flicker. Sometimes the curtain moves just slightly, like someone's peeking out. One night I swore I saw a face. It was late, past 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep and made some tea, then sat by my window. I glanced up out of habit, and that's when I saw it. A pale face, just for a second, peeking out from the side of the curtain. It wasn't lit clearly, just the outline. But I know I saw it. 2 eyes, hollow, wide, unblinking. I dropped my tea. When I looked back, it was gone. The landlord wouldn't talk about it. The next morning, I went downstairs and asked the landlord directly about 3B. He looked annoyed the moment I mentioned it. No one's supposed to be up there, he said. Why are you even asking? I told him I saw a light. Maybe someone broke in. Maybe it's a squatter or something. He shook his head. No, that place is sealed. And I'm not reopening it. Not after what happened. But when I pressed him about what happened, he just walked away. Something was walking at night. Over the next few nights, things got worse. I'd hear faint footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, uneven, like someone dragging one foot. Every time I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Once I heard tapping on my door around 3 a.m. 3 soft knocks. I didn't answer. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one there, but the air felt thick, heavy, like someone had just walked away. I decided to go upstairs. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know. Maybe the landlord was wrong. Maybe someone was living in 3B without anyone knowing. So one evening, just after dusk, I went up to the 3rd floor. The hallway was darker than usual. Only one of the ceiling lights worked, flickering like it was about to burn out. I stood in front of the door to 3B. It looked just like every other door, except the number plate was rusted and barely hanging on. I reached out to knock. The door opened on its own. Before my hand touched it, the door creaked open an inch. I froze. Inside it was pitch black. No sound. No light. I whispered, "Hello?" and waited. Nothing. I should have walked away. I should have gone back to my apartment and locked the door. But something made me push it open. Just a little. It was empty. Almost. The inside was cold. I could see my breath in the air, even though it was warm outside. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no lights, just bare walls and cracked floorboards. But in the corner of the living room, right by the window I'd been watching, there was an old wooden rocking chair. And it was moving. Not wildly. Just gently. Back and forth. Back and forth. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. The lights followed me. That night I kept all my lights on. But around midnight they started to flicker. First the kitchen, then the hallway. And then my window glowed blue. I looked out, and the window in 3B was dark. No light. But my room? It was filled with that same flickering glow. I backed away. When I turned around, I saw the shape of the rocking chair in my reflection. It was behind me. Mrs. Jennings told me the truth. The next morning, I went back to Mrs. Jennings. I told her everything. She hesitated, then sighed. There used to be a woman in 3B. Lived alone. Quiet. Never spoke to anyone. Always kept her light on. Said she was afraid of the dark. Then one night, the building lost power during a storm. Her light went out. They found her a week later. She died in that chair. Alone. Face frozen in terror. No one could explain it. And after that, the light started coming on again, even though the power was cut to that room. I covered my windows. I couldn't bear to look up anymore. I taped cardboard over my window. Moved my bed to the far wall. Tried to forget. But I still hear the footsteps above me. Still feel the air grow colder at night. Sometimes the rocking chair creaks. Not loudly. Just enough to remind me she's still there. Still afraid of the dark. And now, so am I. I've tried to move out. Put in notices. But something always stops me. Strange paperwork issues. Payments that don't go through. Locked lobbies when I try to meet moving trucks. I don't think the building wants me to leave. Or maybe she doesn't. Last night, I woke up to find a soft blue light glowing behind the cardboard over my window. It pulsed gently, like someone saying hello, or warning me not to forget. The man in the yellow hoodie, something about him felt off from the start. It started on a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because Tuesdays were my slow days. I work remotely, so I don't leave the house much except to grab a coffee or take a walk in the afternoon. That day, I took my usual route around the block, earbuds in, music low, trying to relax and clear my head. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the sidewalk, facing away from me. He wore a yellow hoodie. It was oversized, baggy, the hood pulled up over his head even though it was warm outside. I don't know why, but the sight of him made me slow down. Something about the way he stood, completely still, hands by his sides, made my stomach tighten. He didn't move, not even when I walked past. I saw him again the next day. I told myself it was nothing. Just a guy standing outside. Maybe waiting for someone. But the next day at nearly the same time he was there again. Same hoodie. Same spot. Same stillness. Except this time he was facing me. Not staring at me directly, just looking in my direction. I tried to be casual. Kept my eyes forward. But as I walked past, I could feel him watching me. I turned the corner and glanced back. He was still staring. He started appearing everywhere. By the end of the week, I began seeing him in other places. Outside the grocery store. At the far end of the parking lot near my apartment. Once, he stood across the street from the coffee shop I always go to. Never approaching. Just watching. He never moved unless I moved. Always at a distance. Always silent. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. I even asked a friend if she noticed him when we met for coffee. She said she didn't see anyone. But I knew he was there. Behind the tree across the road. Half hidden in the crowd. My nights became restless. I started sleeping with the blinds shut and the door locked. I double-checked the windows. Made sure the chain on the front door was in place. Even moved a chair in front of it. But every night, I'd hear soft footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Deliberate. I live on the 3rd floor. No one should be walking around up here that late. One night, I heard a gentle knock. Not on my door. On the window. The 3rd floor window. I didn't dare look. No one believed me. I told my brother. He brushed it off as stress. You work from home too much, he said. You're just stir crazy. Maybe he was right. So I tried to distract myself. More walks, more calls with friends, even took a weekend trip out of town. But when I came back, there was a sticky note on my door. It was blank. Just a yellow square stuck in the center of the wood. Like a calling card. I checked the building's cameras. I begged the building manager to let me see the security footage. She was hesitant but agreed after I told her I thought someone was stalking me. We pulled up the camera feed for the front entrance. Time stamped Thursday 2:13 a.m. I watched myself walk in, groceries in hand. A few seconds later, a figure followed. Baggy hoodie. Hood up. His face wasn't visible. The manager rewound the tape. There's no record of him entering, she said. No buzzing. No key fob. He just appeared. Then he got closer. It was around midnight when I heard the knock. Not at the window this time. At the door. 3 soft knocks. I froze on the couch. The TV was still on, casting light into the room. I turned the volume down. Knock, knock, knock. Again. I tiptoed to the peephole and looked out. There was no one there. But when I looked down, there was another sticky note. This time it had writing on it. Just 2 words, I'm waiting. I tried to leave the city. I packed my things that night, tossed clothes into a suitcase and called a rideshare. I didn't even care where I was going. I just wanted distance. But when the car arrived, the driver looked confused. You just canceled, he said. I didn't. He showed me his phone. The ride had been canceled 2 minutes before he pulled up. Not by him. Not by me. Someone using my account. When I went back inside, another sticky note was on my kitchen counter. I didn't put it there. It read, "Don't run." I decided to confront him. That evening, I sat in the dark, watching through the living room window. And just after 2 a.m., I saw him. Across the street. Same hoodie. Same stance. This time, I didn't look away. I marched outside, across the lot, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. "Who are you?" I shouted. He didn't move. "Why are you following me?" Still nothing. I took a step closer, and he turned, slowly. His face was wrong. Not like it was deformed, but like it didn't belong. Too smooth. Like a mask molded from memory. Almost familiar, but not quite. He raised a hand and pointed at me, then whispered, "You let me in." I woke up in my bed. I don't remember going back inside. But when I opened my eyes, it was morning. Everything looked normal. No signs of a break-in. No notes. No hoodie. I wanted to believe it was a dream. But when I opened the fridge to get some water, I found a sticky note on the top shelf. It said, "Soon." Now he's always near. Even when I leave the house, I catch glimpses. A reflection in a passing car window. A shadow ducking into an alley. I've tried to ignore it, to move on, but I can't. Because every night, no matter what I do, no matter how many locks I put on the door, at 2:13 a.m. I hear it. 3 soft knocks. And each morning I find a new note. Each one getting closer to the same final message. I'm here. The hidden room in apartment 207 started with a strange draft. I moved into apartment 207 in late November. It was cold, but not the kind of cold that comes from outside. Felt trapped. Like the walls themselves had been holding their breath for years. I was 27, fresh out of a hard breakup, and just needed a place to clear my head. The building was old, but the price was right. Too right, honestly. The landlord seemed nice enough, a little too eager to get someone into 207. He didn't ask for much, just first month's rent and a quick signature. I should have asked why. The first night I slept like a rock. The place was quiet, aside from the usual sounds, creaky pipes, soft hums through the walls. But right around 3:20 a.m., I felt a cold draft blow over my face. I sat up, checked the windows, they were locked tight. The door too. I thought maybe it was just the vents, or my imagination. But every night after that, it happened again. Same time. Same cold breeze. Same weird feeling in my chest like something was just off. The wall that didn't sound right. A week in, I was cleaning the living room and tapped the wall near the hallway with my broom handle. It sounded normal, solid. But a few feet over, when I knocked closer to the corner, it made a hollow sound. Like there was space behind it. There was no door, no access panel, no sign that anything was behind the wall. Just a blank section of plaster, painted over too neatly. I couldn't let it go. That night, I brought out an old stud finder and flashlight. The device beeped strangely around that section, like it couldn't figure out what it was detecting. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. Then I whispered something just out of impulse. "Is someone there?" And I swear I heard a breath. The cracks and the whispers. Over the next few days, I started seeing small changes. Hairline cracks appeared in that section of the wall. Very faint, like spider webs. I also started hearing faint noises from inside. A tapping. Sometimes soft whispering, too low to understand. I tried to convince myself it was just noise from other apartments. But it always came from that spot. Always at night. I finally told a neighbor, Miss Klein, a retired schoolteacher on the 3rd floor. Her eyes widened the moment I mentioned 207. "You stayin' in that one?" she asked, voice lowering. "That room's got a past, sweetie. People don't last long in there. Few months, maybe a year, then gone." I asked what she meant. "They say there's a space behind one of the walls. Some hidden room." They built over it back in the 60s. Never cleared it out. Some say a woman was locked in there. Others say she never existed. The room opens. I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, the tapping became louder, aggressive. It was like someone inside the wall was trying to claw their way out. I grabbed a hammer and started breaking the plaster. The dust was thick. I coughed as it filled the air, but I kept going. Beneath the plaster was an old wooden door. No knob, just a small gap where a latch used to be. I stood frozen for a long time, staring at it. Then it creaked open by itself. Inside the room. The hidden room was small and dark. There was a single chair in the middle, facing the wall. Dust covered everything, and the air felt heavy, like I had stepped underwater. There were old scratch marks on the floor leading toward the wall, away from the door. On the far wall, written in faint red letters, were the words, "I never left." My chest tightened. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. The flashlight flickered. The air grew colder. And then, I heard someone breathing behind me. The woman in the chair. I slowly turned around. The chair was no longer empty. A woman sat there, hair hanging over her face, fingers twitching. Her dress looked soaked, like she had been pulled from a river. She didn't look up, but I could hear her muttering something over and over. I waited, I waited, I waited. I backed into the wall, heart pounding. I closed my eyes, whispering, "Please, I'm sorry." When I opened them, she was gone, but the chair was still rocking, trying to leave. The next day, I packed everything and tried to leave the apartment, but the door wouldn't unlock. My phone wouldn't turn on. Every window showed the same scene outside, gray, motionless, like the world had been frozen. I screamed. I pounded on the walls, but no one came. Every night, the hidden room opened again. Every night, she sat in the chair a little closer to the door. She moved in. After a week, I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I started hearing her voice even during the day, whispering through the walls, the vents, the floors. She wasn't just in that room anymore. She was in the apartment. She followed me, watched me, stood at the foot of my bed. And when I turned the lights on, nothing. But I could smell her. Damp soil. Old roses. Something rotting. Final entry. I don't think I'll ever leave. The walls have started closing in, literally. The hallway is shorter. The windows show only black now. And last night she whispered something new. "You found me. So now I'll stay with you." I don't know what day it is anymore. I don't know who I am. The apartment is part of her now. And I think I am too. The light in cabin 9. The cabin no one rented. I first noticed cabin 9 on the third day of my trip. I had rented a small place by the lake for some peace and quiet. Just me, a few books, and time to clear my head. The resort had 10 cabins lined up along the edge of the woods, and mine was in the middle, cabin 5. Most of the others were empty since it was off-season. Cold, cloudy, and quiet. On the first night, I saw a dim light flicker in one of the far cabins, cabin 9. I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone checked in late. But when I asked the woman at the front desk the next morning, she gave me a puzzled look. "No one's staying in cabin 9, she said. "That one's been locked up since last year." She smiled a little too quickly, like she didn't want to talk about it. The flickering light. Every night after that, I saw the same light. A small, warm glow like a candle or a lantern. Always in the window of cabin 9. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But something about it bothered me. There was no one supposed to be in there. So why was there light? On the fourth night, I walked down to check it out. The air grew colder with every step. The path was covered in leaves that crunched softly under my feet. When I reached cabin 9, the light was gone. I knocked. No answer. I tried the doorknob. It was locked tight. But as I turned to walk away, I heard it. A slow, soft knock, coming from the inside. The missing page. The next morning, I found an old guest book in the main office. People had signed it over the years, some writing full paragraphs, others just names and dates. I flipped through it until I reached last year. There were no entries for cabin 9, just a blank page where the numbers jumped from 8 to 10. I asked about it again, gently this time. The front desk woman paused, then said, "Some guests left early after staying in that one. They said the lights turned on by themselves. One lady claimed she heard crying in the middle of the night. We stopped renting it out after that." She tried to smile, but her hands were trembling. Whispers in the woods. That night I heard it too. I had just settled into bed when I heard soft whispers outside. I froze, holding my breath. They were faint, just on the edge of hearing. I pulled the curtain aside. Cabin 9 was glowing again. But this time the door was open. I could see the shape of someone standing inside. A thin figure just standing in the middle of the room, perfectly still. Then the light flickered out. I went inside. I don't know what pushed me to do it. Curiosity maybe, or something else. I waited until morning, then walked back to cabin 9. This time the door creaked open when I touched it. The inside was dusty and cold. Cobwebs clung to the corners. The air smelled like wet earth and something metallic. There was a single chair in the center of the room, and beside it, on the floor, a journal. I picked it up, heart pounding. The name inside said, Eleanor Green, October 14, 1979. It was filled with short entries. The last one read, "He comes when the light turns on. He watches from the woods. If you're reading this, don't stay another night. He knows you see him now. The man in the trees." That evening, I sat by the window watching cabin 9, and then I saw him. A man, tall, thin, standing just at the edge of the trees behind the cabin. He didn't move, just stared even from that distance. I blinked and he was gone. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was a shadow, my eyes playing tricks, but deep down I knew better. That night the whispers came back, closer this time, and cabin 9's light turned on again, the locked door. I tried to pack and leave the next morning, but my car wouldn't start. I walked to the front office, but no one was there. The door was unlocked, the lights off. It was like the entire resort had emptied overnight. When I turned around, I saw him again, closer now, standing at the edge of the road facing me. But when I looked back a second time, he was gone. Back in my cabin, the lights flickered. My door creaked open, and I heard footsteps in the hallway. Final night. I'm writing this now with the last of my strength. The power is out. The light in cabin 9 has been glowing for hours. He's not standing outside anymore. He's inside my cabin. I hear him walking, slow and careful. He doesn't knock this time. He waits. And now, I understand what the journal meant. When you notice the light, when you ask the questions, he finds you. Cabin 9 doesn't want to be forgotten. And neither does he. The last book in the library. The library no one talks about. I was new in town. Quiet place, cold most of the year. I had taken a job at a small bookstore near the main road, and after work, I'd often walk past an old building on the hill. It looked like a library with broken stone steps and tall windows covered in dust. I asked someone about it once. They just shook their head. That place hasn't been open in years. But one cloudy evening, I saw a light on inside. A faint yellow glow flickering behind the foggy glass. I couldn't explain why, but it made my chest feel heavy, like someone had whispered my name in an empty room. The door that wasn't locked. The next day I walked up the hill. Just to look, I told myself. The path was cracked and uneven. The trees around the building were bare, like they were leaning in, watching. When I reached the front doors, I expected them to be sealed shut. But the left one creaked open, slowly, without a touch. Inside was colder than the outside air. The floor creaked with every step. Tall shelves loomed on either side, heavy with books that looked older than the town itself. The smell of old paper and something sour hung in the air. I should have left, but I didn't. The book that wasn't cataloged. I found it tucked behind a row of dusty encyclopedias. A leather-bound book with no title. I pulled it out and the air grew still. The pages were thick and yellowed. The writing inside was neat, but the words didn't make sense. They were names, dates, and descriptions. Each entry sounded like a memory, someone's last memory. One page stopped me cold. He walked into the library. He found the book. He read about himself. Then he vanished. I slammed it shut. The room suddenly felt darker, and I heard a soft breath behind me. The names in the book. That night, I dreamed of the library. I saw the names written in the book, long lines of them, all written by the same hand. And then I saw mine appear at the very bottom. When I woke up, I felt like something had followed me home. The windows looked darker than usual. My reflection in the mirror seemed slightly off. I told myself it was just stress, that the book had gotten into my head. But the next night, the dream returned, and my name was no longer at the bottom of the page. It was in the middle. Pages that change. I went back to the library. I needed to see the book again, but it wasn't on the same shelf. I searched for hours. Finally, I found it, resting on a reading table wide open. My name was still there, but this time the entry had grown. He came back. He knew too much. Now he's part of the shelves. And below it, a fresh name began to write itself, letter by letter. It wasn't mine. It was someone I knew, trying to leave. I tried to leave town that night, packed my things, got in my car. As I drove, the radio turned on by itself. A soft whisper came through the static. You turned the page. Every road I took looped back toward the hill. No matter how far I drove, I ended up near the library again. It was like the town was folding in on itself, trapping me. Others like me. I started seeing them. People who looked normal at first, but blinked too slowly or didn't breathe. They stood outside the bookstore, at the grocery store, watching. One of them walked up to me and whispered, "We read it too. Now we belong to it." Then she smiled, but her teeth weren't right. The final page. I don't know how long I've been here. The days feel the same. My clock doesn't work anymore. I'm sitting in the library again. The book is open in front of me. There's one empty line left on the last page, and a pen waiting next to it. I think if I write a name, I can leave, but I can't do that to someone else. So I wait. The ink starts forming letters on its own, and I know what they spell. The room that wasn't on the map. The apartment that was too quiet. I moved into the building on a Monday. It was old, with creaky floors and faded wallpaper. The kind of place where everything smelled like dust and old wood. But it was cheap and I didn't have many options. The landlord was a quiet man who handed me the keys without much small talk. He warned me about the heater, told me not to leave the windows open at night, and then walked away like he had somewhere else to be. Apartment 3B, 3rd floor, end of the hall. I didn't think much about the other doors. Not at first. The door that shouldn't have been there. 3 nights later, I was walking back to my place. The hallway lights were dim, flickering like they couldn't make up their minds. I passed doors 3 at 3B, mine, and then I noticed something odd. There was another door at the very end of the hallway. A dark wooden door. No number. Just a black handle and an old mail slot that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. I looked at the floor plan when I moved in. I remembered it clearly. There was no unit past 3B. There shouldn't have been anything there at all. The knocking at night. That night I heard knocking. Not loud. Soft. Slow. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Came from that door. I opened mine and peeked out. The hallway was dark, but I saw the shape of someone standing in front of the door at the end. Not moving. Not saying anything. Just facing the wood like they were listening for something inside. When I blinked, they were gone. The air felt heavier, and I closed my door a little too quickly. The landlord's warning. I asked the landlord about the door. He looked up sharply like I'd said something I wasn't supposed to. "There is no door at the end of the hall," he said. But I saw. There's nothing there. He didn't let me finish. His voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. They darted left and right like someone might be listening. "Don't speak about it again," he said, "and never open it." Then he walked away. Faster this time. The whispers through the slot. A week later, I heard whispering. It started around 2 a.m. Faint, like someone murmuring in a room nearby. But I didn't share a wall with anyone. The other apartments were on the opposite side. I followed the sound out into the hallway. It was coming from the mail slot, the black one on that door. I got close enough to listen. I couldn't understand the words, but they sounded like my name, over and over again, whispered by a voice that sounded like mine. I backed away, and the slot slammed shut. Disappearing neighbors. The woman in 3A disappeared. I hadn't talked to her much, but she always smiled in passing. One morning, her door was wide open, lights on, but she was gone. Her keys sat on the floor. The hallway smelled strange, like burnt paper and old rain. I told the landlord. He just sighed. "People come and go," he said like it meant nothing. That night, I checked the mystery door again. And this time, it was open just a crack. What I saw inside, I shouldn't have looked. But curiosity is louder than fear sometimes. I pushed the door open. Inside was a long, dark hallway, much longer than the building should allow. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one warped and dusty, reflecting back parts of me that didn't look quite right. At the very end of the hall was a room with a single chair and a table. On the table was a box, and inside the box was a recording device. It played my voice. saying things I'd never said, describing things I hadn't seen. Yet, the room that remembers. After that, everything felt different. My apartment creaked more than usual. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the taste of dust in my mouth and the feeling of being watched. The hallway seemed longer than before. I'd walk past the mystery door and hear my own footsteps echoing after I stopped walking, like the building was copying me, learning me. I tried to leave. I packed my things, called for a cab, took the stairs 2 at a time. But when I got to the exit, the door was gone. There was just more hallway, more doors, all dark wood, all without numbers. I ran, turned corner after corner. Everywhere I went led back to that same door, the one with no number, and the whisper calling my name from behind the mail slot. Now I live in the walls. I don't know how long I've been here. I don't need food anymore, or sleep. Sometimes I watch the new tenants from inside the walls. I whisper their names through the slot. I hope they don't open the door. I hope they ignore the sound of footsteps that aren't theirs. Because if they open it, the room remembers, and it always wants one more. The man who was never on the lease. The new apartment that didn't feel new. I moved in during early autumn. Leaves were starting to fall, and the wind had that soft, chilly feeling that made everything seem a little quieter. The apartment was on the top floor of a narrow old building tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. It wasn't fancy, but it felt private, peaceful. The landlord was polite, smiled too much, handed me the keys and said, "You're the only tenant on the top floor. Should be nice and quiet up there." I believed him. At first, the sound of another door. The layout was simple: living room, bedroom, kitchen, small hallway, one front door. But on my first night, while unpacking, I heard something strange. A door closing. Not mine. It sounded like it came from across the hall. I peeked outside. The hallway was short. Only one door. Mine. There was no across the hall. Just a blank wall and an old radiator. Maybe someone downstairs slammed something hard. That's what I told myself. Footsteps that weren't mine. I started noticing more sounds. Soft footsteps above me. Scraping like someone pulling furniture. But I was on the top floor. There was no apartment above mine. I checked the ceiling. It was low old wood. No crawl space. No attic. I asked the landlord about it. "There's nothing up there," he said. "You're the only one up there. You sure it's not from outside?" I knew the difference between outdoor and indoor sounds. This wasn't outside. This was right above my head, a shadow in the mirror. About a week in, I was brushing my teeth late at night. My bathroom mirror was small and old, a little foggy around the edges. As I leaned forward, I saw something in the reflection. A person, standing in my hallway. Tall, not moving. I turned around, nothing there. But when I looked back into the mirror, the shape was still there, watching me. I shut the door and didn't sleep that night. The forgotten room. One morning, I woke up and my hallway looked different. Longer. There was a new door at the end. I walked toward it, thinking maybe I was still dreaming. It was painted the same dull beige as the walls, but older, like it had always been there, just hidden. I touched the doorknob. It was cold. I turned it gently, but it didn't open. There was no lock, just resistance, like something didn't want me to enter. I looked again an hour later and the door was gone. The lease with a missing name. I went down to the office to double-check my paperwork. Something about the whole place felt off. The secretary was an older woman with kind eyes. She printed me a copy of my lease. I looked at the tenant list on the building record out of curiosity. It showed my name, a few others from the lower floors, and one name that was smudged out on the top floor. The same floor I lived on. There were only supposed to be 3 units in the whole building. Mine was listed as Unit 3A, but the record showed a 3B, lightly crossed out. I asked about it. She just smiled nervously and said, "That was probably a mistake. Ignore it." But I couldn't. The man I never saw fully. Sometimes I'd catch him in the corner of my eye. A man in dark clothes, just standing at the end of my hallway. Not moving, not blinking. But every time I looked straight at him, he was gone. One night I woke up with my bedroom door wide open. I always kept it closed. At the edge of the doorway, just beyond the light from my nightstand lamp, I saw him. This time he didn't disappear when I looked at him. But I couldn't see his face. Just the shape. Tall, thin, wrong. Then I blinked and he was gone. The radio that played his voice. I found an old radio in one of the kitchen drawers. I hadn't put it there. It wasn't mine. It was dusty, wrapped in a gray towel. I plugged it in. Static. Then a voice. Come. Saying my name. Over and over. Not angry. Not threatening. Just there. I unplugged it, threw it in the trash outside, and locked my door. When I woke up the next morning, the radio was sitting on my kitchen table. Still playing. Still saying my name. The locked door returns. That door at the end of the hallway came back. This time it was open. Just a crack. Enough for me to see a flickering light inside. And something moving. I wanted to run. But I didn't. I stepped inside. The walls were lined with pictures. Hundreds of them. All of people in this apartment. Some were old, black and white. Others were modern. All had one thing in common. There was always a man in the background. Sometimes he was blurry. Sometimes he wasn't. But he was always there. Watching. Waiting. The lease that changed overnight. The next day my lease had changed. Where it used to say it now said. And below that someone had scrawled, "He never moved out."